Hello everyone, this is Fanfic Audiobook. Here you find original fan made audio stories.
Demon System. I became the ultimate demon lord. Part 1. I thought transmigrating at a convention was nothing more than the fantasy of fools on niche forums. Until I was wearing that meticulously crafted demon cosplay, feeling the slight discomfort from the hard prosthetic horns glued to my forehead, and striking one last gloomy and wicked pose under the photographer's flash, the next second, the world spun. An indescribable sense of compression came from all sides, as if I were being stuffed into a skin that was far too narrow. Warm, viscous liquid enveloped me, and an extreme sense of suffocation gripped my throat, or rather, my vocal organs that had not yet fully formed. My heartbeat was so faint it almost didn't exist. The sounds from the outside world were blurry and distant, as if separated by a thick layer of seawater. I heard terrified screams, chaotic footsteps, and an old voice, perhaps a midwife's, trembling as she announced, "No, no breath. It's a stillborn. Stillborn. No, I am not." Something cold awakened within me. It wasn't my consciousness, but something else, a non-human thought pattern belonging to the demon I was cosplaying. Like an invisible thin film, it began to coat my cognition as a human. The instinct for survival, mixed with that cold demon will that existed purely for the sake of existing, drove this tiny body that should have stopped functioning. I took my first breath of cold air, my lungs burning, and then let out my first cry upon entering this world. It was extremely weak, but it was indeed proof of being alive. The outside instantly went silent, followed by an even louder outburst of exclamations and fearful whispers. "It's alive. Amaterasu Omikami be praised. A resurrection from the dead. This is an ill omen. I became a miracle in the delivery room, or rather, a monster. They named me Tsukihiko. Ubuyashiki Tsuki Hiko. I knew this name. I knew what it represented. Endless darkness, the curse of feeding on humans, the arrogance and cruelty of the king of demons. And I was lying in his cradle as an infant, feeling the desperate weakness that this body had carried since birth. Every breath felt like pulling on a broken bellows, and my heart beat chaotically and feebly, as if it could stop at any moment. No wonder that, scum boss, was so afraid of death. Living every day in the shadow of death, watching healthy people come and go, and having to endure their pitying remarks, anyone would be upset. Moreover, I was just an ordinary person with a happy family, no deep-seated hatreds, and no desire to transmigrate and change the world. This inexplicable transmigration made me really angry. After all, a perfectly fine person had transmigrated into a sickly invalid. But now, I didn't seem to care much about these things anymore. Certain things belonging to being human were slowly leaving me. In the first few years, human emotions were still struggling violently. Looking at this body's mother, that noblewoman who was frail and sickly, having lost much of her vitality after childbirth, and who always looked at me with complex fear, I would feel a sharp heartache, the instinctive attachment of a child to its mother. Hearing a physician privately assert that I wouldn't live past 20, a strong sense of unwillingness and anger would surge, the instinctive desire of life to persist. But soon, the demon's thoughts, like a slowly seeping spring, began to freeze these useless emotions. In order to obtain better care, more effective medicine, and the resources needed for survival, I quickly learned to use crying and simple words to express discomfort and hunger. This was not for communication, but for manipulation. "I'm cold," I would say in a child's thin voice, accompanied by a perfectly timed shiver. The maid would immediately bring more silk quilts, and the fire would burn brighter, far more efficient than crying. "Bitter." I would frown slightly when taking medicine, expressing resistance. The elderly lady in waiting would try every possible way to find precious candied fruits, or at least promise a sweet soup afterward. This could secure extra resources. "Father, are you well today?" On the rare occasions I saw that noble and distant father, I would squeeze out the most submissive and timid expression to ask about his health. This would earn a moment of his time, and perhaps a trace of undetectable pity for this sickly son who might not live long, along with one or two rewards, perhaps more precious medicinal ingredients, or a few insignificant scrolls of calligraphy. Language was a tool, precise and efficient. I recognized this clearly, like using chopsticks or a sword. The demon's mind praised this, it allowed me to obtain what I needed for survival with less effort. The human part felt a deep sorrow. These submissive, dependent words were nothing more than carefully woven lies, intended to squeeze value from these providers. I listened to the whispers of the servants. They said that although I was sickly, I was surprisingly precocious and sensible. Days in the manor were an unchanging gray, decoctions, coughing, and the garden scenery outside the window shifting through the four seasons. Having survived intermittently until the age of 16, a famous physician was invited into the manor by my father. I knew very well that in my current state, turning into a demon was not a good move. Furthermore, as someone who had received a modern education, I could never accept the act of cannibalism. Thus, I couldn't help but pay more attention to this doctor my father had found, wanting to confirm if he was the person from the original demon slayer who could concoct that bizarre medicine beyond common logic. When the physician was let in, he brought an aura that was out of place with the stale smell of medicine in the residence. He was about 40 or 50 years old, with calm eyes that looked at people with an almost rude focus, his face full of a physician's kind appearance. He looked like a peerless divine doctor. Please rest assured, young Master Tsukihiko, I will do my utmost to treat you, the divine doctor guaranteed solemnly, holding a bowl of black, murky medicine that emitted an unsettling smell. Alarm bells rang in my mind. That zombie medicine should be left for those who need it. I didn't want to become a zombie king. Seeing this doctor, those were the only thoughts in my head. No need. I weakly turned my face away, avoiding the bowl of medicine that was getting closer and closer. I know my own body. This may be destiny, there's no need for treatment. The old divine doctor was persistent, his kindness turning into stubbornness. A physician's purpose is to save the world. Young master, do not give up hope. This prescription is the culmination of my life's work, you might as well try it. I said I don't need it. I raised my voice with a sharpness that surprised even myself. You do. He almost forced the bowl to my lips, the pungent smell rushing into my nostrils. What's the harm in trying? In that moment, I seemed to see the future. Not a future of recovery, but a future of becoming a walking corpse, craving human blood. Using all my strength, I suddenly raised my hand. The porcelain bowl shattered on the ground with a sharp cracking sound. The black medicinal juice, like an ill omen, slowly spread across the floor. Seeing that I wasn't falling for his carrots or sticks, the old divine physician's eyes flickered. He didn't press further, but instead stroked his beard, putting on an air of compassion for the world. You are still young master, do not give up so easily. This prescription of mine is the culmination of my life's work. Please consider it carefully. After all, being alive is more important than anything, isn't it? Leaving behind those meaningful words, he bowed and withdrew. Me. Living is important, of course, but definitely not by turning into a man-eating monster. I stared at the closed sliding door, the alarm bells in my heart not silenced by his temporary retreat. If anything, I felt more uneasy. This old geezer looked kind and benevolent, but the obsession and fanaticism in his eyes were practically overflowing. He would never give up easily. Sure enough, as time passed, the precarious balance of this body was completely shattered. The sense of weakness grew daily, the frequency of coughing up blood increased, and high fevers and fainting spells became a common occurrence. My periods of lucidity grew shorter, while my time spent in a coma grew longer, my consciousness often sinking into a vast, icy sea of darkness. Control over my body was rapidly slipping away. This filled me with an unprecedented panic. Whether as a human or as a gradually awakening demon, losing control of oneself was the most terrifying thing. And then, after one particularly deep slumber that almost made one lose awareness of their own existence, I was forcibly dragged back to consciousness by an extremely intense, sickeningly bitter taste. The taste was so strong it felt as if it didn't just stay in my mouth, but had permeated my throat, invaded my internal organs, and even stained my thoughts with a layer of desperate bitterness. I struggled to lift my heavy eyelids. My blurred vision gradually came into focus. What entered my sight was the face I least wanted to see. That divine doctor was sitting by my bedside, gently setting down an empty medicine bowl. A few drops of pitch-black medicine, like a concentrated liquid from the abyss, remained at the bottom. The older, the wiser indeed, this old geezer took advantage of my coma to force-feed me the medicine. As soon as I opened my eyes, I saw him smilingly putting down the empty bowl, while my mouth was filled with bitterness. Does this old fossil know what he's done? I don't even dare to imagine. Demon logic plus the ceiling of physical potential from becoming a ghost plus me, a 3D omniscient and omnipotent prophet equals what a terrifyingly powerful final boss. For several months, I began a battle of wits and courage with him. Unfortunately, my body was too weak, and I was frequently fed new medicine while unconscious. Gradually, my condition did seem to stabilize a bit. The frequency of coughing up blood decreased slightly, and although I remained weak, that feeling of constantly being on the brink of death eased somewhat. My father expressed his satisfaction and bestowed generous rewards. The servants whispered among themselves, saying the doctor might actually be talented. Only I knew what the price was. My tolerance for sunlight grew even lower, not just physiologically, but my psychological aversion intensified. At night, my hearing and smell became exceptionally acute. I could hear the whispers of the maids in the distance and smell the warm, sweet metallic scent of blood flowing under their skin. That fated future seemed to be drawing closer. I could vaguely sense something. The old divine physician looked at my daily recovering body with satisfaction. He didn't yet understand what he had created with his own hands, a true monster, far more terrifying than a mere ghost. Once I completely transform into a ghost, I will no longer be human. Whether in body or soul, I will become a beast draped in human skin, capable only of mimicking humanity. One day, as I stood by the window looking out, he approached again with a beaming smile. Does the young master still feel any discomfort? I told you long ago, this prescription can cure all ailments. It cured me very well, I said in a flat tone. Having you around is truly a blessing for humanity. The old divine physician was so pleased by the praise that even his beard seemed to smooth out. He smiled and waved his hand. Think nothing of it. Today is the final bowl of medicine. Drinking it will solve the sunlight issue, because this medicine contains many Yin elements. It originally feared the light, but I have already thought of a solution. I didn't resist anymore. I was already standing at the edge of the cliff. What room was there to turn back? Not being able to travel during the day was indeed troublesome, and I never liked nighttime activities anyway. As I tilted my head back to drink that bowl of medicine, one clearly felt something in my body quietly changing. After observing you for a few more days, Master Tsukihiko, to confirm everything is fine, I shall take my leave, the old divine physician said with enthusiasm. There are still many gravely ill people in the world. I must go and help them. My gaze was fixed on a youth outside the window humming while trimming branches. The carotid artery under his thin skin was pulsing rhythmically, and the warm scent of blood wafted over with the wind, tempting the roots of my teeth to tighten. I heard my own voice, sounding terrifyingly calm. Do you plan to spread this medicine throughout the world? Naturally. The old divine physician was so excited his beard trembled. This is a merit that will save the world. I want to ensure there is no more suffering from illness. I doubt it will work. This medicine has very serious side effects. The medicine bowl in the little old man's hand gave a sudden jerk. Why do you say that, young master? Could it be your body still feels unwell? He stepped forward urgently, wanting to take my pulse, but I shifted my body to avoid him. Is it very abnormal to want to eat meat, for a human? The old divine physician was stunned by my non sequitur. Eat meat. It's a good thing if the young master wants to eat meat. It shows your appetite is returning and your health is greatly improving. Not that kind of meat, I interrupted him, my voice steady but carrying a cold tone that felt foreign even to me. The smile on the old divine physician's face froze. He seemed to finally sense something was wrong. Then, what kind of meat does the young master wish to eat? Venison. Wild pheasant. I slowly turned around, my red eyes meeting his bewildered gaze. Sunlight shone through the window lattice behind me, casting a distinct boundary of light and shadow at my feet, while I stood entirely within the darkness. I am talking about, I repeated clearly, enunciating every word while carefully savoring the scent of fear that suddenly rose from him, human flesh. Nonsense. The old divine physician's face changed drastically as he subconsciously scolded me, but his voice carried an imperceptible tremor. How can the young master make such a shocking joke? This is. The old divine physician looked at the cold, inhuman expression of the person before him, and he found himself unable to speak. He stumbled backward, bumping into a low table behind him, causing the tea set to make a crisp clattering sound. How can this be? I studied the prescription repeatedly, the balance of yin and yang, strengthening the body. How can, he muttered to himself. The morning air carried a chill, but inhaling it into my lungs no longer triggered that familiar, heart-wrenching pain and coughing. I walked through the estate's meticulously maintained yet still somber courtyard, my steps steady. I could even feel the slight springiness of the soil beneath my feet. I walked for a good while, passing through a small bamboo grove, circling a pond covered in thin ice, and even pacing back and forth along the long corridor a few times. There was no panting, no cold sweat, and my heart beat steadily and powerfully in my chest, providing a continuous stream of energy that felt almost foreign to me. My body had become incredibly fit. I stopped, looking down at my palm, still pale, yet seemingly harboring an extraordinary strength, and felt a flood of emotions once again. Haiyan Kyo is truly an outrageously boring place. No internet, no games, number 24-hour hot food from convenience stores, no bustling traffic, and not even a single light novel to relax with. As far as the eye can see, there are monotonous rooftops, people dressed in complex layers of clothing acting with rigid formality, and a deathly silent darkness that sets in after sunset. As a modern person, being trapped here is practically equivalent to torture. Though it feels boring, it's not enough to make me go mad. At this moment, I'm actually somewhat grateful for the demon tribe setting I brought with me. That cold, efficient mode of thinking seems to help me filter out a large amount of the anxiety and depression that might arise from such a massive change in environment and social isolation. It allows me to focus more on the present and survival, rather than wallowing in useless sentimentality. From the current perspective, it seems I'm not that different from a human. I can clearly perceive emotions, the slight pleasantness of a stroll, the minor irritability toward this boring environment, and even a tiny bit of relief because my health has improved. I know what happiness is, what sadness is, and what anger is. My mind hasn't become a pure, emotionless logical machine, nor has it become something like an AI as I had imagined. It's as if I'm still human. This realization made me feel a long-lost sense of ease. I thought carefully about the plot of the manga Freren again, digging out the story of Matched of El Dorado from the depths of my memory. Not understanding malice or guilt, I meticulously analyzed my own heart. After all, I am a demon created after the fact. My core was formed within the moral framework of human society. Malice and guilt. I probably still understand them. I felt a brief moment of joy. If that's the case, it seems my inner core hasn't been completely replaced. I am still myself, just with an additional set of efficient tool-like thinking and a strengthened body. The terrifying transformation into a completely non-human being that I had been worrying about doesn't seem to have happened. Things aren't as bad as I imagined. Sunlight filtered through the gaps in the bamboo leaves, casting mottled spots of light on the pebble-paved path. I took a deep breath of this crisp, no longer painful air, feeling that steady, powerful beat in my chest. Perhaps I can continue to exist in this way. Possessing both this healthy body and the convenience brought by demon thinking, while retaining my human emotions and moral compass. I can't achieve something as grand as suicide, I only intend to take things as they come. Maybe one day I'll go home. Or maybe some overpowered child of God will pop up and slay me, this Oni, forced to die because I'm not strong enough. I stretched my body, which hadn't moved much in a long time, my bones letting out slight, pleasant cracks, and then turned to head back to my room. Just as I rounded a rockery, the scene under the corridor ahead made me stop in my tracks. The old doctor, who had been despondent just a few days ago, was now being held tightly by the sleeve by a well-dressed middle-aged man. The man was practically prostrate on the ground, his voice carrying a sob and desperate pleading. Please, Master Physician, have mercy. My young son really won't survive this winter. He's coughing terribly, his whole body is burning up, and many physicians say there's no hope. I heard you are a man of great power, that you even cured the sickly young master of that estate. I feel like I've seen a glimmer of hope. I beg you, save him. No matter how much it costs, I'm willing to sell everything I own and work like a slave to scrape it together for you. The old doctor was being pulled so hard he swayed, his face still showing traces of his recent dejection, and he was a bit flustered by this sudden plea. He tried to pull his sleeve back, his tone dry. Let go. This is unbecoming. I cannot cure every illness. This medicine has side effects, it cannot be used. My appearance caused the air at the scene to momentarily stagnate. Upon seeing me, the old doctor's expression immediately became extremely unnatural, his eyes flickering as he avoided my gaze. This divine physician had indeed been avoiding me lately. He likely worried that his old bones would be eaten by me, the recovered young master, as a form of ingratitude before he could fulfill his dream of saving the world. After all, if someone bluntly says they want to eat people, anyone would be terrified. The pleading man also noticed me. Seeing my extraordinary attire and unique aura, looking like someone who transcended the world, he couldn't help but be stunned, and his grip on the doctor's hand loosened slightly. I nodded politely to the two of them and did not stop, continuing toward my residence. When a servant at home begs for medicine, one should allow them some dignity, having onlookers might hurt their self-esteem. Moreover, the medicine belongs to the physician, and I have no right to decide for others. When it comes to treating illnesses and saving lives, one should naturally follow medical advice. A doctor always knows more than a layman. The physician watched the departing figure, which was calm to the point of being almost indifferent, his lips trembling slightly. He looked down at the man kneeling on the ground, whose last spark of hope seemed about to go out, and finally made up his mind. Fine, get up. The old doctor's voice was weary, yet held a rekindled spark of a healer's persistence. That medicine. I shall prepare a dose for you. But the dosage must be greatly reduced. The medicinal properties are violent, one must be on guard. He thought to himself that since the Ubuyashiki young master's daily words and actions were no different from an ordinary person's and showed no beast-like madness, perhaps that so-called carnal desire side effect was merely caused by the medicine being too strong. If he reduced the amount of all the medicinal ingredients accordingly, surely it could both cure the illness and make those terrifying side effects disappear. As soon as this thought arose, the dejection in his eyes faded slightly, and he transformed back into the physician who was wholeheartedly devoted to studying medicine and attempting to challenge the impossible. A few more months passed. I sat at the desk by the window, my fingertips brushing over the rough pages of the Heian-kyo classics. The words written upon them recorded the wisdom and ignorance of this era, yet they failed to truly capture my attention. Most of the time, reading was simply a way to pass the endless hours. Suddenly, an extremely faint yet exceptionally distinct scent drifted into my nostrils, the smell of blood. It wasn't the fresh, surging kind, but rather carried a withered, decaying aura, like the final struggling flicker of an oil lamp before it goes out. It belonged to someone in their twilight years and was fading rapidly. After turning into a demon, my sense of smell had become incredibly keen, especially my perception of blood. Over these past months, hunger had often followed me like a shadow, humming like background noise, particularly when I caught the scent of healthy, fresh blood. But every single time, I forced myself to suppress it. There was no other reason than this, the thought that people are dirty. I would endure it. If this were the modern era and I was starving to the point of madness, I might be able to convince myself to take a bite of something sterilized, but this is ancient times. Can these people even be clean? Even in wealthy families of high standing, the frequency of bathing is far below modern standards, let alone among the commoners. Sweat, grime, potential parasites, all sorts of imaginings allowed my modern sense of cleanliness and rationality to firmly suppress the impulse to eat humans. Hunger was certainly uncomfortable, but at the thought of biting into a mouthful of mud and bacteria, that discomfort seemed bearable. But the scent of blood coming from outside now was not only decaying but also carried the familiar bitter aroma of medicinal herbs, and it was drawing closer. I could even hear an unsettling friction sound from the pebble path outside the courtyard, as if something was being dragged along with great difficulty. I put down my book and frowned slightly. An assassin. Or a thief. But this aura felt somewhat familiar. Pushing open the door, the cold moonlight flooded the courtyard. Following the sound and scent, I saw a figure on the ground not far away, struggling and crawling extremely slowly toward my courtyard. It was the old doctor. He was covered in blood, especially on the side of his neck and his shoulders, where there were several deep, bone-deep lacerations. Blood was gushing from those wounds, staining his plain physician's robes and the ground beneath him red. His movements were already extremely weak, every inch forward exhausting the last of his life force. What happened? I walked over quickly and knelt down to look at him. Though there was shock and suspicion in my heart, my voice remained unnaturally calm. I checked his injuries, they were fatal. He had lost too much blood, and his life force was nearly spent. Unless I turned him into a demon as well, there was basically no cure in this era. Hearing my voice, the old doctor's unfocused eyes struggled to center on my face. His lips trembled, emitting a nearly inaudible rasp mixed with bloody froth. Young master. I'm sorry. Fragmented words spilled from his mouth, carrying endless regret and despair. It turned out that on that day, he couldn't bear it after all. He had prepared medicine for that sick child and greatly reduced the dosage of all the ingredients, fully believing he could avoid the terrifying side effect of carnal desire. At first, the child's illness truly seemed to have been cured. The fever broke, and the child could even get out of bed. The family was immensely grateful to the miraculous physician. But soon, abnormalities appeared. The child became irritable and showed a strange interest in raw meat. Just last night, he completely lost control. His reason remained, yet he could not control his surging strength and that crazed craving for blood. He attacked his own parents and bit his younger sister to death when she rushed forward to protect their mother. Fortunately, the parents were considered high-ranking members of this clan, and the area they lived in was frequently patrolled by guards. By the time the guards arrived and collectively suppressed him, he had regained his senses, kneeling on the ground in tears, repeatedly saying, "I'm sorry." Witnessing all this, the old doctor was struck as if by lightning, his heart filled with terror. Only then did he truly understand how horrific the side effect I mentioned that day was. If a greatly reduced dose resulted in this, then the prescription I had drunk in its entirety. Tonight, the child took advantage of the chaos to break free from his restraints and found the old doctor, who was brewing the final dose of medicine in the pharmacy. He didn't kill him, he only roared through his tears, "It's all your fault. You turned me into this half-human, half-ghost monster. My sister is dead." After leaving fatal wounds on him, the child fled. He still has his reason, he said, "He hates me." Every word the old doctor spoke was accompanied by a surge of bloody froth. But I hate myself even more. As a healer, he already sensed his impending death. But before he died, he had to crawl here. Not to seek help, but to seek atonement. I came to apologize. He stared intently at me, his eyes filled with broken faith and boundless guilt. I failed that child, and I failed you even more. A great reduction, and yet it was like that. Every day. He could not imagine what kind of terrifying willpower I had used over these past months to suppress that crazed desire, 1,000 times stronger than the child's, which originated from the medicine he had personally administered, all beneath a calm exterior. I didn't understand why he would cling to his last breath and crawl here in such pain just to tell me this, nor did I understand why he felt the need to apologize. Without his medicine, both the child and I would have long been nothing but withered bones in a grave. One must know how to be grateful and content. He had at least given me the chance to live and wait to go home. My body has indeed recovered because of it, so why bother with this? I leaned down to comfort the dying elder, hoping this physician who sought to save the world could pass away in peace. The physician's eyes suddenly flew wide, his pupils contracting violently from extreme shock and a deeper kind of fear. Even the agonizing pain of his wounds and the ebbing of his life were ignored in that moment. His gaze, which had been filled with guilt and a plea for forgiveness, was now replaced by an unbelievable horror. He had expected the young master's anger, the young master's pain, the young master's accusations, and even hoped the young master would use his final strength to retaliate against him. That, at least, would prove that what he had created was still a human, capable of hatred and suffering. But he never expected to receive such a consolation that was so calm it was almost eerie, logically clear yet completely detached from any emotional response. This terrified him more than any roar or curse ever could. Under the desolate moonlight, Ubuyashiki Tasuki Hiko's crimson eyes were as still as a deep pool, without a single ripple. Though this young master's face was still as pale as jade, his lips had taken on an eerie luster, like a blood-soaked rose, exuding a heart-stopping, non-human quality in its exquisite beauty. The physician had originally thought the person before him was using incredible willpower to suppress non-human desires, but now he realized with horror that Ubuyashiki Tasuki Hiko might not need to suppress them at all. Because those human emotional responses that needed to be suppressed had perhaps long since vanished. His guilt and self-reproach reached their peak at this moment, transforming into the deepest fear and pity for his creation. So it's even worse. The light in his eyes faded rapidly, his final words broken and filled with a despair heavier than death. The sin I committed. I'm sorry for making you. He did not finish his sentence. The last trace of breath was severed. His eyes did not close, remaining wide open as he stared at me. But within them, the previous guilt was gone, frozen instead in a state of extreme shock, realization, and an indescribable sorrow. I looked at the corpse that had failed to close its eyes and fell into silence. Is it because I haven't interacted with people for too long? I actually failed to comfort this old man. Well, I probably need to improve my verbal skills. As expected, if a person doesn't socialize, they won't be able to say touching things. After all, I used to be quite the chatterbox. The night guards hurried past the moon gate carrying lanterns. A flash of light suddenly illuminated the scene within the courtyard. Bloodstains darkened the ground, and the old doctor lay motionless in a pool of blood. I stood quietly nearby, my sleeves stained with blood, my expression calm and undisturbed. The leader of the guards turned deathly pale in an instant, his soul nearly leaving his body. With a heavy thud, he fell to his knees. The several subordinates behind him also hurriedly knelt, their foreheads pressed hard against the cold pebble ground, their voices trembling uncontrollably from extreme terror. Young master. This subordinate has failed in his duty. I deserve 10,000 deaths. To think a villain slipped in and disturbed the young master, harming the great doctor. Please punish me severely, young master. Their fear was thick and vivid, radiating a scorching energy like freshly baked pastries, forming a sharp contrast with the deathly silence brought by the cold corpse at my feet. I raised my hand slightly, my tone flat in a way I hadn't even noticed. It is nothing. This is not the fault of you and your men. Rise. The guards felt as if they had received a great amnesty, yet they didn't dare truly relax. They stood up trembling, hanging their heads and not daring to look at me, let alone cast a second glance at the corpse on the ground. Have him properly settled, I commanded. The courtyard fell into a brief silence, broken only by the rustling of bamboo leaves in the wind. The guards secretly exchanged glances until finally, the leader steeled himself and asked in a weak voice, Young master, may I ask, how should he be laid to rest? I was actually stunned for a moment. How to lay him to rest? Naturally, he should be buried. But the specific process, the coffin, the rituals. I knew nothing about the funeral customs of Heian Kyo. More importantly, I looked at the aged face on the ground. What was his name? My memory bank seemed to be covered by a thin veil, information about him was blurred. It seemed he had never formally introduced himself to me. And I, surprisingly, had never thought to ask. This lapse in memory caused me to pause for a moment, but to an outsider, this pause looked like some kind of deep, displeased moment of silence. A moment later, I found what I considered to be the most concise and efficient solution. Bury him in my courtyard. I pointed toward a corner of the garden, beneath that lush, ancient tree. Right there. This. The guards snapped their heads up, their faces ridden with unbelievable horror. They looked at their master as if looking at some incomprehensible, terrifying entity. Burying a corpse in the very courtyard where one lived. What a shocking, scandalous thing that defied all social norms. Seeing their hesitation, I had an idea. Did they think it was too much trouble, or did they want to just dump the old man in some random mass grave? That wouldn't do. He had done me a kindness, although that kindness brought trouble, merits and faults must be distinguished clearly. He was my benefactor, I spoke again. Naturally, he needs to be laid to rest in the earth. Keeping him close to me is convenient. This subordinate obeys. The guard leader squeezed the words out through gritted teeth, his voice dry. They didn't dare raise any further objections, their strong survival instinct overrode all terror. Several men, their hands quick yet unable to stop trembling, lifted the old doctor's remains. Their movements were filled with fear for the dead, for the order, and for the young master who stood quietly nearby, watching them with calm eyes. They began to process the scene quickly and silently, digging the earth and burying him. The entire process took place in a suffocating silence. 2 other guards began to wash the bloodstains from the pebble path. Naturally, there were no convenient chemicals in this era, they could only use cold well water to rinse again and again. The dark red blood was washed away, spreading along the cracks in the stones like an ominous map. The diluted pink liquid flowed over the soil by my feet, emitting a fishy scent mixed with rust and earth. I stood quietly under the corridor, watching them kneel on the cold ground, repeatedly scrubbing with stiff brushes. Fine beads of sweat, whether from effort or fear, broke out on their foreheads, reflecting slightly in the cool moonlight. The sound of water and the muffled labor under the corridor were gradually shut out. I returned to my low table. Indoors, the candle flame flickered, clearly illuminating the half-read ancient text once more. My fingertips brushed across the coarse paper pages as I tried to regain the reading mood that had just been interrupted. The text was still dry, recording the elegant but useless daily life of some court noble, or some extremely tedious sacrificial ritual. The wisdom of Heian Kyo seemed to always be spent on these trivial details that had nothing to do with survival. For the ritual, first cleanse the hands with pure water, face the east, and recite the incantation 3 times. I silently read the records of a certain festival, but my thoughts involuntarily drifted away. Buried under that tree, it should be deep enough, right? It won't be easily dug up by wild dogs or the like. The soil there seemed quite soft, so it wasn't too much effort for the guards to dig. As for a coffin, since there isn't one right now, rolling him in a mat and putting him directly into the ground doesn't seem too disrespectful. After all, the form isn't important, the result is what matters. The man is in the ground, and that is the end of it. From outside the window came the faint, muffled thuds of falling earth, along with the even lighter sounds of water and scrubbing. They were cleaning very thoroughly. This efficiency was worth acknowledging. Tomorrow, perhaps, well, it wouldn't be reasonable to show no sign of appreciation. I'll tell the accountant to give each guard on duty tonight an extra portion of wine money. It's hard work being busy all night. I thought that after handling the doctor's affairs, I could continue this seemingly endless, boring yet stable life of convalescence. I even began to contemplate longer-term plans. Since my appearance wouldn't change, in another 10 or 20 years, everyone in the manor would be old and gray while I remained a youth. This would inevitably cause panic and suspicion. At that time, perhaps I should die of illness, and leave, change my identity, find some deep mountain forest to hide in, and quietly watch the changing of the eras. After all, what I lack least is probably time. During this period, I haven't completely wasted my time. Besides reading those dry ancient texts, I've spent most of my energy exploring this brand new body. I discovered that this body contains an amazing plasticity. I can feel a power surging within me that is almost instinctive, a power to change form, like manifesting my weapons, which are many whips and such. I tried more delicate operations, such as changing my appearance. The original intention was for my future escape plan. If I could change my appearance and stature at will, wouldn't I be able to hide perfectly in the human world? However, putting it into practice was fraught with difficulties. The problem wasn't the ability, but rather, the imagination. I tried to construct an image of an elderly muezzin. In my mind, how should the wrinkles be distributed? What kind of world weariness should be in the eyes? How should the texture of sagging skin be simulated? These details were extremely blurred, resulting in forms that were either weirdly distorted or simply remained as they were. In my most failed attempt, I nearly turned into a puddle of pale, writhing gelatin that couldn't maintain a human shape, looking exactly like a slime from a fantasy work. This made me realize that I cannot turn into a form I cannot clearly imagine. But conversely, if the goal is clear, the change follows naturally. For example, changing gender. This seemed much simpler. There was no need to conceive a brand new face. I only needed to make adjustments based on my original self, narrowing the skeleton to be more slender, making the shoulders narrower, the curve of the waist softer, the Adam's apple disappearing, and the facial lines polished to be more rounded and exquisite. The process was as smooth as water flowing into a channel. I stood before the bronze mirror, looking at the woman in the mirror who was 70 to 80% similar to Ubuyashiki Tsuki Hiko, yet bright, delicate, and carrying a non-human charm. The crimson pupils within the slightly softened features instead added a bit of demonic beauty. Not bad, I evaluated objectively, my voice also turning into a clear, feminine one. Similarly, shrinking my body size and simulating a child's appearance wasn't difficult. Scaling down the bones and muscles proportionally and adjusting the facial ratios to be more youthful was all it took. After experimenting a few times, I lost most of my interest. For now, the greatest use of these changes was limited to future concealment. At this stage, maintaining the identity of the recovered young master, Ubuyashiki Tsuki Hiko, was the easiest choice. I restored my form to its original state, feeling the subtle readjustment of bones and muscles as if nothing had happened. Recently, an oppressive whisper always permeated the mansion. When the servants exchanged glances, their panic was almost palpable. Occasionally, when I stopped under the corridors, my hearing, far exceeding that of an ordinary person, would catch fragmented words. Another one died, their neck was bitten to pieces. I heard, a monster did it. I don't dare go out at night at all. Is it, a fox demon's work? It's scarier than that, it's like they were eaten alive. A demon attacking people. The rumors poured into my ears like a storm, causing my thoughts to stall for a rare moment. The first thought that flashed through my mind was actually a baseless sense of self-doubt. Could it be me? Was it me, in an unconscious state, sleepwalking out, and devouring those people? The thought was absurd yet horrifying. I subconsciously looked down to examine my pale, slender fingers. They were clean and tidy, without a trace of blood. I didn't want to be stained with bacteria or black mud at all. Wait, it seems I'm not the only demon. There was also the child who was saved by the old doctor using a reduced dosage, but then killed his family and injured the doctor after losing control, finally escaping under the moonlit night. I had actually carelessly overlooked this. A flash of annoyance passed. Yes, besides me, there exists another, first demon, in this world. Fragments of the doctor's words before his death echoed clearly at this moment. He had greatly reduced the dosage of all medicinal ingredients, fully believing he could avoid side effects. This meant that the medicinal power that child endured, whether in intensity or purity, was far from comparable to mine. What I drank was the complete original formula, which might have even mutated due to demon race settings. More importantly, I remembered a crucial detail from the original story. That last dose of medicinal soup containing the mysterious, blue spider lily. According to the old doctor's broken lament that night, the child attacked him while he was brewing the last dose in the pharmacy. What did this mean? It meant that the child, just like that scum boss in the original story, insisted on medical violence, interrupting the treatment before the medicinal effects were fully stabilized and the most critical dose had been taken. Having analyzed this far and confirming that I wasn't the one sleepwalking to commit crimes, I finally breathed a sigh of relief, set aside those annoying rumors for the time being, and prepared to rest. However, just as my consciousness was about to sink into the blurry edge of sleep, a possibility suddenly occurred to me, making me snap upright from the tatami. That guy will come looking for me sooner or later. I had already searched the old doctor's room thoroughly, all prescriptions and notes had been burned to ashes by him before he died. But there is still one living piece of evidence in this world, me. I am the only existence who completely drank all the medicine and successfully overcame the sunlight. This matter is not a secret in the mansion. Many people know that I was once terminally ill and was reborn thanks to the miracle doctor's skilled hands. To that failure wandering in the depths of darkness, tortured by the sun, and driven by the need to eat human flesh, what do I represent? I represent the only antidote. I represent the possibility of reaching perfection. Before transmigrating, I had seen too many works about post-apocalyptic survival and tests of human nature. I was reborn a few days before being harmed. The core of such plots is a profound depiction of how human nature changes in an instant under extreme pressure. That child might have once loved his family dearly, but is he still, him, now? In the face of eternal pain and longing, how much of his former human emotions could remain? Could he control that most primitive and darkest desire to devour, eating me, the perfect form, clean to seize the power he lacks to resist the sun? I couldn't be sure. I suddenly felt that things weren't looking good. In this situation, haven't I become Kibutsuji Nezuko? And that failure wandering outside has instead become the demon king, who is eyeing and hunting me. This absurd association made me roll out of bed and sit up instantly, taking a few steps to the blurry bronze mirror. Reflected in the mirror was a tall, pale young nobleman. Curly black hair fell across his forehead, and a pair of crimson pupils held a non-human calmness and eeriness under the dim candlelight. Ubuyashiki Tasuki Hiko. The name Kibutsuji Muzan had during his human period is now also my name. Exactly the same as that scum boss. However, I underwent a more complete transformation than him, overcame the sun, and possess a clear reason and power that he could never have had in his early stages. A trace of near-comical realization dispelled that moment of panic. What am I afraid of? I am the Demon King Muzan. Perhaps not the final perfect form that lived for 1,000 years, but at this moment, in this era where Sugikuni Yorichi won't be born for another 500 years, I am undoubtedly the existence standing at the peak. A defective product who lost control early due to insufficient dosage and didn't even drink the last dose of medicine. How is he worthy of coveting me? Thinking of this, the bit of tension born from rumors and speculation vanished instantly, replaced by a cold and absolute confidence. I calmly returned to the bedside and lay down again. There are still more than 500 years before the person who can threaten me is born. In this long stretch of time, I am invincible. When did I become so arrogant? And only considering myself. I completely failed to think about what a disaster my staying here would cause to the people around me. After concluding that I was invincible, that mindset of treating potential threats as ants and barely keeping them in mind emerged naturally and without hesitation. But this wasn't baseless arrogance. My mind clearly traced back the chain of evidence supporting this conclusion, the complete medicinal effects, immunity to sunlight, and knowledge of the original plot. This was the result of a comprehensive analysis, a logical inference built on objective facts, rather than emotional conceit. Rationality, not arrogance. I confirmed this point once again. However, it was precisely this overly smooth rationality that made me feel a trace of strangeness. I was completely immersed in assessing my own strength and calculating future threats, but I hadn't thought at all that if that out of control, failure, came for me and a conflict broke out in this mansion, what kind of total disaster would it bring to these servants and my biological parents, who knew nothing and were completely defenseless? I knew very well what kind of person I was before transmigrating. An ordinary modern person might not be considered selfless or great, but at least I understood the principle that, when the city gate is on fire, the fish in the moat suffer. I would subconsciously consider whether my actions would implicate the innocent and whether they were within the norms of the law. But now, my thinking patterns had become extremely efficient and extremely focused on myself. Those irrelevant people and things seemed to be automatically categorized as background boards that didn't require extra computing power, only being pulled back to the center of my vision now by a belated thought. Do I actually have human emotions? Have I really overcome the instincts of the demon race? Panic, like a tiny ice snake, coiled around my spine for the first time, not from an external threat, but from a doubt about my internal cognition. No, I should still be human. I tried to grasp evidence to refute this terrifying guess. Only humans have compassion. Just now, wasn't I considering other people? Doesn't this show I haven't been affected? This is a powerful piece of evidence. Isn't this thought of worrying about others' safety itself proof of my being human? I made a decision. I intend to leave the family. I chose a misty morning to encounter that group of poorly acting mountain bandits. They were nothing more than vagrants I had hired from nearby villages with a few silver coins. As agreed, they rushed out howling when the oxcart I was riding reached a remote mountain path, snatched the few valuables I had intentionally left on the cart, and then symbolically pushed the empty cart down the slope. Young Master Tsukihiko. The driver's cries were heartfelt, echoing through the valley. Hidden within the dense canopy, I watched this farce play out below. Only after the noisy search party had departed did I leap down from my hiding spot and shoulder the simple pack I had prepared beforehand. Inside, besides a few gold and silver trinkets, were mostly clothes and some herbal medicine illustrations I could find in this era. A few days later, I arrived at a small village near the mountains that was almost entirely isolated from the world. The land here was barren and information was scarce, making it an ideal hiding place. The backstory I fabricated was simple and pitiable. I came from a declining medical family, had been frail and sickly since childhood, and was prophesied not to live past 20. Unwilling to wait for death in the deep courtyards of my family estate, I set out with my ancestral medical skills, wanting to help others as much as possible within my limited lifespan. The villagers had never seen someone like young Master Tsukihiko in their entire lives. My pale skin was dazzlingly white among the dark, thin villagers. My curly black hair did not look like that of a common laborer, and my red eyes appeared melancholy when lowered, yet when raised, they held a clarity they couldn't understand, as if I could see through the human heart. The way this young master spoke, his posture when walking, and even the way he sat quietly were all completely out of place among them. He's a noble young master from the city, isn't he? Probably a young master from some fallen noble family. He looks like a celestial child from a painting, just a bit too pale. Sigh, how pitiful. I heard he knows medicine. He's so kind-hearted, thinking of helping others even in his condition. They discussed me in hushed voices behind my back, their eyes a mix of curiosity, awe, sympathy, and a hint of estrangement born from the vast difference between us. I quickly won their initial trust with my medical skills. When a child's high fever wouldn't break, I stabilized the condition using physical cooling and identified herbs. When a hunter broke his leg, I helped him set and fix the bone. When a mother had a difficult birth, the advice I gave based on modern knowledge actually worked. These small miracles gradually spread. I became the mysterious, handsome, kind, but terminally ill doctor of the village. I lived in an abandoned thatched hut at the end of the village, which I repaired myself. At night, listening to the wind and the faint howling of wolves in the distance, I could clearly perceive that cold, powerful strength flowing quietly within my body. I didn't get tired, I didn't get sick, and my strength and speed far exceeded those of ordinary people. During the day, I deliberately displayed an appropriate weakness, occasionally letting out a suppressed cough during consultations, perfectly playing the role of a terminally ill patient gently struggling against fate. Helping others was done with a purpose. I wanted to use these actions to anchor my gradually drifting humanity, to remember the lessons of benevolence and devotion from another world. Every day, seeing the sincere gratitude of the villagers after they recovered and hearing the laughter of children because of a few pieces of candy I gave them, that primal, benevolent connection between humans seemed to return to me. I could still smell the sweet fragrance of their flesh and blood, and my nighttime hearing was still sharp enough to catch whispers. But at the same time, the act of helping itself seemed to maintain a dangerous, fragile balance between my non-human core and my human appearance. I sat at the doorway of my hut, looking at this poor but vibrant little village, with the unchanging, brilliant river of stars overhead. There was none of the prosperity of Heian Kyo here, let alone the conveniences of modern society. But here, I seemed to have temporarily found a foothold. Neither fully integrated into humanity nor completely sliding toward becoming a monster. Just an outlier trying to use what I've learned to relieve others, using it to remind myself that I was once human. Until, as usual, I went deep into the mountains to gather herbs. Returning to the village under the night stars with a bamboo basket full of herbs, the first thing that burst into my perception was a thick, suffocating smell of blood. It wasn't the smell of a chicken or a pig being slaughtered. It was the blood of dozens, hundreds of people splashed on the ground, soaking into the soil, a sweet, sickly scent emanating from a river of death. The fence at the village entrance was crooked and broken. The usual wisps of cooking smoke were nowhere to be seen. Dead silence. Even the barking of dogs and the crying of children had vanished. My footsteps faltered, the bamboo basket slid from my shoulder, and herbs scattered all over the ground. My territory had been touched. Who dares touch my things? I rushed into the village. Hell on earth. The once relatively tidy dirt road was a mess, smeared with blood and minced meat. The doors of the simple houses were wide open, revealing the mangled corpses lying inside. The old man who liked to greet me lay by his own water vat, half his head missing. The little girl who always loved to give me wild fruits, her small body was thrown onto a woodpile like a rag doll, her neck twisted at a gruesome angle. Not a single corpse was intact. Biting and clawing marks were everywhere. This wasn't a massacre, this was the leftovers after a feast. Rustle. Under the old locust tree in the center of the village, a figure with his back to me was slowly straightening up. Beneath his feet was the disemboweled corpse of the village chief. He seemed to have just finished his last meal, licking the blood and minced meat from his fingertips with lingering desire. His body was distorted and bloated, completely beyond the scope of a youth. His skin was an unhealthy bluish gray, his nails black and sharp, and his mouth split open to a non-human angle, dripping with saliva and streaks of blood. He heard my footsteps and slowly turned his head. That face, one could still vaguely see some human contours, but it had been completely twisted by madness. His eyes were a turbid blood red, devoid of any reason, containing only the most primal hunger and desire for destruction. I had never seen him before. But I knew who he was. The child the old doctor described as filial to his parents and gentle and polite had now turned into a non-human, man-eating demon. Found you, that demon said to me. I knew you were still alive. Hey. What was that old geezer's final prescription? It's all his fault. He ruined my family, forcing me to hide like a rat and only come out at night. I didn't answer his question, my gaze sweeping over the blood-splattered thatched huts and scattered limbs. Haven't you already had your revenge? The doctor is dead, why did this? Don't you dare act all righteous with me. He roared, his face twisting. Don't tell me you haven't eaten. After gaining such power, can you eat anything other than human flesh and blood? Hey, for the sake of being the same kind, you'd better tell me everything, otherwise, I'll just have to absorb you. This fellow's words suddenly stopped. In an instant, he felt a deep sense of crisis. Relying entirely on beast-like survival instincts, he lunged sideways at the critical moment. There was no warning, no visible movement, not even a sense of pain. His left arm was severed at the shoulder and flew off, hitting the mud, his fingers even twitching reflexively. The cut was terrifyingly smooth. It took a heartbeat for the dark red blood to gush out. He staggered back, his turbid blood-red pupils suddenly shrinking to the size of pinheads. He looked at his empty left shoulder in disbelief, then snapped his head up to look at me. I remained where I was, my sleeves fluttering slightly in the blood-scented wind. Several black whips extending from my side were still floating slowly in the air. From the tip of one, blood droplets were slowly falling, hitting the soil at my feet and blooming into a small, dark stain. This guy has some skill, though it's also because I haven't really trained myself these years. That strike just now was intended to cut him in half from the middle. I didn't have a demon-slaying weapon like a Nichiren sword on hand. Moreover, no one could say for sure whether a demon created by drinking medicine had even overcome the weakness of decapitation. So, I could only break his legs first and watch him squirm on the ground like a maggot. Then, grabbing him by the scruff of the neck, I threw him into the middle of the clearing where the sun was fiercest and the direct light was unobstructed. After doing this, I went back to the thatched hut and fetched an old umbrella. When I returned to the clearing, he was struggling with his remaining arm, trying to crawl out of that death zone, dragging a winding trail of blood behind him. His broken legs were twisted at grotesque angles. I didn't stop him, I just swung my whip again whenever he was about to crawl past the edge of a certain range, accurately striking him back to the starting point. After repeating this twice, he stopped trying. He just curled up on the spot, letting out whimpers like a trapped beast, a mix of pain and despair. His cloudy blood-red eyes glared at me, churning with the most vicious curses. I opened the umbrella and sat on a fallen dead log not far away, safely enveloped in the shadow cast by the canopy. Although I wasn't afraid of the sun, being exposed to sunlight caused an uncomfortable itching sensation on my skin. The night was slowly fading, and the horizon began to turn the color of a fish's belly. I waited quietly, like a patient spectator waiting for an inevitable final curtain call. The first ray of golden sunlight finally pierced through the clouds, shooting straight down like a sharp sword. Ah! A shrill scream, so agonizing it didn't sound human, instantly shattered the silence of the morning. His skin began to emit thick smoke the moment it touched the sunlight, giving off a charred stench like burning wet wood. The bluish-gray flesh quickly became blackened, carbonized, and cracked. He rolled and clawed frantically, but it only accelerated his disintegration. The cursed roars soon turned into unrecognizable, meaningless wails, finally fading into desperate whimpers. I watched quietly, holding my umbrella, sitting in the shadows. I watched as he turned bit by bit into charcoal under the sun, until he finally stopped struggling completely and crumbled into a pile of ugly, human-shaped ash. A morning breeze blew by, picking up a few flakes of ash and scattering them without a trace. Only a dead silence remained between heaven and earth, along with the sunlight that was gradually becoming brighter and warmer. He should be thoroughly dead, right? I stood up, unconsciously rubbing the corner of my sleeve. The next place to go, perhaps I should go to the seaside. I suddenly remembered that I seemed to like the shimmering sea in the past, liking the quiet and comfort of being wrapped in tenderness when submerged in water. But the seaside. I reckon I'd have to travel a long way. My thoughts shifted. I'd settle for the next best thing, finding a deep mountain with a stream or small lake and few signs of human presence. That was easy enough in ancient times. Most places hadn't been developed yet, and the range where humans could set foot was limited, so finding a quiet corner wasn't a difficult task. I turned to leave, but my footsteps paused. My gaze swept over the messy thatched cottages and those scattered, no longer complete bodies. The bloody scent permeating the air had long since faded, replaced by the scent of sunlight and earth. Ah! I almost forgot. People need to be laid to rest after they die. I sighed and swung the whip again, coiling up the remains on the ground and dragging them to the chosen spot. Then, like a tireless machine, I began the process of dragging people, digging holes, and covering with earth. With the cooperation of the whip's shadow and my strength, the soil was quickly overturned and then rapidly covered back up. I didn't set up tombstones for them, nor was there any ceremony. I simply ensured that every set of remains I could find was covered by soil, no longer exposed to the wilderness. By the time I finished all this, the sun had risen quite high. I stood before a patch of freshly turned earth, looking at the several slightly raised mounds before turning and stepping into the forest, my figure soon disappearing beneath the thick shade of the trees. Years in the mountains lost the human scale of time. The rising and setting of the sun and moon, the flourishing and withering of plants, to me, these were just a change of background. Exactly how much time had passed? 1 year. 3 years. Perhaps longer. Time flowed through my fingers like stream water, leaving no trace and drawing little attention. The place I eventually found to settle down was very much to my liking. A deep mountain where wild beasts far outnumbered human traces, saving me from many unnecessary disturbances. A few small towns were scattered at the foot of the nearby mountains, which could satisfy my most basic needs of occasionally buying clothes and collecting some books. I no longer needed ordinary food to sustain my life, but perhaps due to lingering human habits, I would still occasionally hunt bears or hares in the mountains, roasting and eating them, and I would also pick wild fruits. The taste was bland, but it was better than nothing. More often, I just sat by the stream, watching the water babble, or strolled through the forest, listening to the wind and birdsong. When I encountered lost travelers or herb gatherers in the mountains, I would casually guide them out. Until a crow flapped its wings and landed on the rock where I often sat, causing a ripple in my long undisturbed state of mind. It didn't speak immediately, but instead looked me over with an almost scrutinizing gaze, as if conducting some sort of assessment. After a moment, it puffed out its chest and spoke in human language that was clear and rigid, with the rhythm of some official document, yet the tone unexpectedly maintained a tentative respect. Respected Excellency. Its choice of words was extremely cautious, as if reciting a carefully considered document. By order of the current head of the Ubuyashiki family, I take the liberty of conveying greetings and a humble request. It paused briefly, observing my reaction. Seeing that I remained silent, with only my red eyes calmly looking back, it continued in that unique tone, a blend of a bird's shrillness and the rhythm of human speech. The master of the house occasionally captured scattered records of you in certain extremely ancient and obscure family secret scrolls and sporadic local chronicles. Although deeply aware that this move is extremely abrupt, he still harbors a heart of supreme sincerity, requesting that you might grant an opportunity for a meeting. The master solemnly promises that there is absolutely no intention of crusade or accountability on this trip. The Kasugai crow emphasized specifically, its wings spreading slightly to show solemnity. It is merely a dialogue seeking to resolve doubts. The Ubuyashiki clan has been contending with demons for 100 years, yet their knowledge of the origin and nature of demons is still like looking at a leopard through a tube. The master firmly believes that your existence itself might be a solitary lamp illuminating certain mists. Therefore, he is willing to exhaust all sincerity, seeking only the possibility of a dialogue. The Demon Slayer Corps has been established. And it's been around for a while. I was a bit dazed. I knew better than anyone whether I had created any demons. And since that original one had been burned to death by the sun by me, how could there be so many demons outside? Could it be, just because I turned into this non-human thing, even if I never actively spread the curse, my existence itself is a kind of pollution of the bloodline's source? My birth was like a cursed anchor. Even if I did nothing, it would somehow lead my blood relatives, the Ubuyashiki family, to inevitably walk towards a fate of confronting demons. Even catalyzing out of thin air demons that shouldn't have existed. Like some kind of world line convergence. Or, for a higher level, rule, to maintain some kind of balance, because of my erroneous existence, it automatically generated a corresponding repair program, the Demon Slayer Corps, and more errors, other demons. I hated this kind of bug that couldn't be explained by existing logic. I was even a bit annoyed. The Kasugai crow was still waiting quietly, keenly perceiving my overly long silence and low mood. This small creature instinctively flapped its wings uneasily. I suppressed that ripple of displeasure in my heart, and my red eyes refocused on the Kasugai crow in front of me. Whatever the reason, the situation was already as it was. The Demon Slayer Corps existed, demons were rampant in the world, and I really did need to go and understand the situation. Fine, I finally spoke. You decide the time and place. Following the Kasugai crow's directions, I stepped into a residence located on the edge of a small town at the foot of the mountain. With its vermilion gates and high walls, the deep courtyard appeared exceptionally silent under the moonlight. I walked slowly through it, my superhuman perception having already scouted the surroundings. The houses and streets were orderly, yet, they were completely deserted. It wasn't the natural silence of a late night, but a thorough, artificial emptiness. There was no breathing inside the houses, and no heartbeat on the streets. Had all the surrounding residents been evacuated in advance? They certainly went to great lengths for this meeting. Passing through the corridor, the paper doors of the main house were open, with only a single dim yellow lamp lit inside. A young man dressed in a white houri sat alone on a cushion, his posture upright and his aura gentle, yet unable to hide his frail health. Before him lay another cushion and 2 cups of tea. Hearing my footsteps, he turned his head slightly. Those pale purple eyes lacked focus, yet they looked precisely in my direction. On that pale face, which was covered with purple veins and some decaying crusts, a gentle and weary smile appeared. You've come, he said softly, his voice like the night wind brushing through a bamboo forest. Thank you for coming as agreed. I am Kagaya Ubuyashiki. There was no one else in the room. No guards, no heirs, not even an attendant. He was actually all alone. I walked to the cushion opposite him and sat down, my gaze sweeping over his defenseless posture and the Kasugai crow perched on his shoulder. He was here alone, not out of recklessness, but because he was laying everything bare before me. His weakness, his sincerity, and a determination that staked his very life. Good evening, head of the Ubuyashiki, I replied, my modern education prompting a polite response. My voice was steady, betraying no emotion, as if I were merely making an ordinary nighttime visit. I apologize for the long wait. This overly ordinary, even polite greeting caused the gentle smile on Kagaya Ubuyashiki's face to visibly falter for a moment. He seemed to have anticipated countless openings, questioning, intimidation, indifference, or even murderous intent. Yet he alone had not expected such a polite pleasantry. His unfocused pupils shifted slightly, as if trying to see me more clearly. A faint, almost startled ripple of emotion flashed across his curse-eroded face. Even the Kasugai crow on his shoulder, which had remained vigilant, tilted its head slightly, a hint of human-like confusion flashing in its beady eyes. Sitting closer, I realized he seemed to be only the age of a child. Because his aura was so mature, I had misjudged, he looked to be only about 16 years old. The kind who would have to go to the pediatrics department in a modern hospital. A brief silence spread under the dim yellow light. Ubuyashiki was recalibrating his perception of me. After a moment, the smile reappeared on his face. This time, the weariness remained, but there seemed to be a hint of genuine relief. You are more different than I imagined, he chose his words carefully. It is Kagaya's honor to receive such a greeting from you. You must have many questions, I will do my best to explain. He threw the initiative to me. When asking for a favor, one must first show sincerity. His current posture was clearly meant to make explanation the first step in showing goodwill. He would reveal his cards first, letting me see his situation and goals clearly before discussing any subsequent requests. After all, when facing an unknown entity, any concealment could be counterproductive. Thus, he was willing to explain first, laying everything that could and should be set out on the table. I didn't respond for a moment. It had been too long since I had sat face to face with someone like this. Having been alone for so long, even small talk felt a bit awkward. I felt there should be a couple of trivial remarks to warm up before getting to business. After a moment of silence, I looked up at him and said the words I hadn't spoken in a long time. Have you eaten? What did you eat? How was it? Ubuyashiki didn't answer immediately. His pale purple eyes blinked, and he tilted his head ever so slightly, almost imperceptibly, a small gesture that leaked his inner confusion. Perhaps even he himself didn't realize it. The Kasugai crow on his shoulder, which had been on high alert, tilted its head quite obviously, almost to 90 degrees, its beady eyes filled with pure, undisguised bewilderment. Have you eaten? What did you eat? How was it? Was this some kind of subtle probe about the nature of feeding? Was he asking about the experience of a human, tasting food to contrast it with a demon's craving for flesh and blood? After a brief, suffocating silence, Kagaya Ubuyashiki seemed to finally give up on overthinking and decided to take the words literally. He took a soft breath, his tone becoming somewhat cautious. Thank you for your concern, sir. He weighed his words, his voice still gentle but much slower. Today, I had some light porridge and side dishes. The taste was acceptable. He paused, as if feeling the answer was too simple, and added, due to my health, my diet has always been light, so I've grown used to it. Sounds good, I replied. What did you want to ask me by inviting me here alone? Thinking about it, I didn't really have anything to ask. If Ubuyashiki wanted to talk to me about the curse, or tactfully persuade me to think of the innocent members of the family and end this existence that shouldn't be, I could understand that. After all, I've lived long enough, and I'm not from this world. If I really am causing trouble for most people, I really should head to heaven sooner. I should be able to go to heaven, right? As for the establishment of the Demon Slayer Corps and the century-long battle against demons that appeared out of nowhere, there wasn't much to ask. Those demons had nothing to do with me, surely it couldn't be my fault. Ubuyashiki looked visibly dazed again for a moment. That's it. This was the Q&A session for the one who could be considered the original demon. Enormous confusion, like a physical vortex, almost seemed to condense around him. He had anticipated countless possibilities, prepared corresponding answers, and weighed numerous arguments, trying to secure a chance of survival or some insight for his family in this dangerous conversation. It felt like a full-force punch hitting thin air, leaving him in a state of weightless bewilderment. He even subconsciously opened his mouth slightly, as if wanting to confirm something, but not knowing where to begin. But he was a smart man. Although he had encountered unexpected situations several times, he quickly adjusted his emotions and began to inquire. You should know of Takaya Ubuyashiki, right? He asked. I tilted my head slightly and began to sift through my long and fragmented memories for this unfamiliar name. The young man waited quietly, and the Kasugai crow on his shoulder actually imitated its master, staring at me unblinkingly with its black, beady eyes, its posture a perfect mimicry. This comical scene made my thoughts suddenly drift. Ubuyashiki, and his Kasugai crow. They really are alike. Not just the head tilting, but also that cautious, deliberate tone from before. This crow is practically a miniaturized, animal version of Kagaya Ubuyashiki. Thinking back to when the Kasugai crow came to deliver the message, with its bureaucratic yet effortfully respectful manner, it was the spitting image of its master. So, is this what they mean when they say pets become more like their owners over time? That even such subtle expressions and temperaments can be mimicked. My gaze swept back and forth between the young man's pale, serious face and the crow's fluffy little head. Ka. The Kasugai crow voiced its master's confusion. It was only when it cried out that I pulled back my wandering thoughts. I have no memory of it, I replied. Kagaya Ubuyashiki's fingers, resting on his knees, curled almost imperceptibly, and a deeper sense of bewilderment flickered in his eyes. He seemed to be trying to catch something from my tone. Was it perfunctory indifference, or was I truly clueless? But the voice of the person before him was as calm as a deep pool of water, without a single ripple. No. Memory. He repeated, his voice trailing upward with a hint of incredulous testing. That original demon, born at the same time as the person before him, had a very deep impression of me. After all, the clues the family had pieced together over the long years pointed to one fact. Ubuyashiki Koya seemed to have been searching for something all along. And the members who were fortunate enough to survive the Demon King's hands brought back a vague message: there is one more original demon. By repeatedly deducing from scattered family records, they had painstakingly unearthed that forgotten name. Ubuyashiki Tasuki Hiko. The same congenital illness, the same physician's treatment. But Tasuki Hiko of the main house had long since fallen off a cliff during a bandit attack, and not even his body was recovered. That demon must have known that Tasuki Hiko had become a demon, and might have even met him, to be so obsessed with searching. As the only two demons born during the same period back then, even as time passed, how could he have no memory at all? Ubuyashiki fell silent for a moment, his fingertips lightly stroking the pattern of the haori on his knees, as if organizing his chaotic thoughts. Are you saying, sir, that you have no memory of the demons from your time, or of the events back then? He asked with extreme caution, fearing he might touch upon some forbidden topic or misjudge my attitude. Hearing Ubuyashiki say that, I seemed to remember something again. Ah, is his name Koya? My gaze drifted almost imperceptibly for a moment, as if piercing through hundreds of years of time, landing on that village filled with the scent of blood and death. I narrowed my eyes slightly, and for the first time, a trace of extremely subtle, almost ethereal realization colored my voice. It had actually been so long. Is it that guy? I have a bit of an impression. I remember leaving him to burn to death under the sun. He's actually still alive. Are you kidding me? I saw him turn to ash with my own eyes. What is this? Can ash blown away by the wind still regenerate? He's not a cockroach. Is this fate? Something predestined? Even without Demon King Muzan, some Demon King Yuzan, or the like might pop up. Ubuyashiki clearly hadn't expected to hear such crucial news. The two demons had actually clashed. And Koya was nearly killed by the demon before him. Was it because two tigers cannot share one mountain? Or a conflict of interest? Yet, among the demons slain by the Demon Slayer Corps, there had never been a demon created from the blood of Ubuyashiki Tasuki Hiko. Their master was always Koya. In the statistical base of 100 years, there were none. In other words, the other party either never created demons or lacked the ability to do so. Ubuyashiki lowered his eyes, his long lashes casting faint shadows beneath them, as if sorting through this sudden contradiction. If what the person before him said was true, and Koya could survive being burned by sunlight, his recovery ability was likely far beyond the Demon Slayer Corp's understanding. And this, Tsukihiko, before him, being able to defeat Koya, possessed strength that was equally not to be underestimated. Were there now two such terrifying enemies? Has he overcome the sunlight? Ubuyashiki inquired. That's impossible, right? I was very cautious, I only left after seeing him turn to ash in the sunlight. I just don't know why he's still alive. I wasn't the type of person who, like in TV dramas, would just turn and leave without checking the results when victory was certain. Ubuyashiki's tone became excited. His breathing quickened almost imperceptibly for a moment, and his voice took on an irrepressible, almost urgent quest for knowledge. Could you, please think back more carefully? Was there anything unusual at the time? Any detail could be vital. These words burst out with unusual force. However, as soon as he spoke, he suddenly realized his loss of composure. He immediately retracted his leaning posture, sat upright again, took a deep breath, and forcibly suppressed the momentary leak of excitement. His voice returned to its previous gentleness, yet it couldn't hide a trace of residual tremor. My deepest apologies, I have been rude, he said softly, with sincere regret. He lowered his head slightly, as if calming the stormy waves in his heart. The heavy pressure brought by the various possibilities had caused even this habitually calm young family head to rarely lose his composure. If I had to say there was any oversight, something I didn't confirm under my own eyes. An arm. I spoke up in confusion. I blew off his arm during the attack. That was the only thing I didn't confirm had vanished under my gaze. I see. Can he survive even with just a small piece of a limb remaining? Ubuyashiki murmured to himself. He gradually realized that the demon in front of him was quite easy to talk to, so he asked even more boldly. Why did you two clash? The enemy of an enemy is a friend. It wouldn't hurt to temporarily formulate a plan based on the situation. Even if only one could be eliminated for now, it would reduce the pressure on those who follow. I looked out the window. The sun had gradually begun to rise. Time really does fly, a whole night had passed just like that. Ubuyashiki's Kasugai crow reminded its blind master, sunrise. Is it already that time? Apologies, I meant no harm. You are more than welcome to stay in this courtyard until you leave tonight. No one will come near here. I have instructed that for 3 days, I will be the only one here, Ubuyashiki said immediately. It doesn't matter. My voice remained flat. I withdrew my gaze from the window and let it fall on him, yet it seemed to pierce through him, looking further away. It wouldn't matter even if there were an ambush. If you believe my existence also brings you unbearable trouble. I paused briefly, giving an option that might sound preposterous to them, then do as you see fit, eliminate the threat. Ubuyashiki was once again baffled by these unexpected words. He didn't respond, thinking rapidly about the true meaning of my words. Was it a test? A threat? Or, a nearly neutral statement he couldn't understand? A demon would actually suggest letting them decide whether to act. No resistance. Before he could sort out his thoughts, the other party had already continued, returning to his previous question about the conflict. As for the dispute, he popped out of nowhere and disturbed my life, so I dealt with him. I recalled that night, and the feeling of annoyance resurfaced in my heart. Sunlight completely filled the courtyard, casting bright spots of light across the floor through the sliding doors, with fine dust floating in the air. For ordinary demons, daylight is a fatal purgatory, but for me, it was just a bit glaring and felt somewhat unnatural. Ubuyashiki sat quietly in the room without moving, his posture still composed, as if he weren't sharing a room with a demon. His Kasugai crow scanned me from time to time with its sharp eyes. The courtyard was silent. Just as he said, no one approached. This arrangement was so thorough it felt almost intentional, both to ensure my safety and perhaps as a form of invisible isolation to protect others. I paced boredly through this mansion that looked elegant but was excessively empty. The floorboards echoed slightly under my feet, making the surrounding silence even more pronounced. The Kasugai crow's gaze was like an invisible thread, firmly stuck to me, its head turning as I moved. When I left the initial room and turned toward another that seemed to be a study or guest room, it fluttered its wings and followed at a distance it deemed safe yet sufficient for surveillance. Most of the rooms were empty, as if no one had stepped inside for a long time. When I pulled open the cupboard doors, they were empty too. I wandered around until it was likely time for lunch, and some physiological clock deeply rooted in the past, habitually, reminded me, it was time to eat. Of course, there was no hungry twitching in my stomach, but the thought surfaced naturally nonetheless. Then, I belatedly realized an obvious problem. There was nothing in this house. Didn't Ubuyashiki say that besides himself, no one would appear nearby for 3 days? Then what does he eat? Today is only the first day, right? Curiosity prompted me to observe more closely. I returned to the first room and even scanned the corners intentionally. No food boxes, no water flasks, not a single trace of stored living supplies. Not just food, there wasn't even a bedroll or a spare set of clothes in this house. It was as if Kagaya Ubuyashiki had never expected to survive past last night when he came here. Therefore, He had no need to prepare anything to sustain life, no need to waste extra resources. This trip of his was made with the resolve to die, coming to face an unknown demon, who could very likely take his life in an instant. This deduction was logical and even fit my shallow understanding of the responsibility behind the name, Ubuyashiki. A subtle emotion, perhaps, admiration. Or maybe just, realization, flashed through my heart, too fast to catch. Eventually, I chose to sit under the eaves of the backyard. The eaves here extended quite far, casting a large shadow that completely blocked out the increasingly harsh midday sun. The crow followed as well, stepping with its little claws to crouch on the edge of the veranda about 3 meters away, continuing its silent and focused surveillance. My hands were truly idle, so I began to bend over and poke at the stones and dirt beneath my feet. There are so many bugs in ancient times, they're everywhere once you flip something over. I picked up a few long, nameless insects and watched them wriggle in my hand. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted the little black bird and waved the insects in front of it. The Kasugai crow must have been hungry too, as it instinctively hopped forward. This crow was fluffy and looked quite endearing. I suddenly felt a playful urge and leaned my whole body forward, simply lying flat on the cool floor, instantly closing the distance between us to less than a few centimeters. Quote exclamation mark quote. The Kasugai crow was clearly startled by my sudden approach, jumping back several steps with its wings puffing out for a moment, letting out a short, wary, caw. It stared at me tensely before realizing I seemed to want to feed it. It was a clever little bird that had undergone rigorous training, with a personality similar to its master's. After some thought, it decided that not provoking the person in front of it was the best course of action, for the sake of its master's survival. It accepted the little insect. The moment it swallowed the bug, I took the opportunity to reach out and quickly yet gently stroke its back feathers a few times with my fingertips. The texture was fluffier and softer than I had imagined, with a hint of warmth. The Kasugai crow's body visibly stiffened for a moment, but it didn't dodge. Its black eyes remained unblinking as it watched me, as if assessing the risk of the next move. Suddenly, a heavy coughing sound came from the living room next door. The Kasugai crow, which had just been stiffly allowing me to pet it, gave a violent jolt, its bead-like eyes instantly filled with clear anxiety. It no longer cared about the unpredictable feeder before it, letting out a short, sharp cry and suddenly taking flight. It turned into a black arrow, desperately darting toward the living room where the coughing originated. The courtyard fell silent again, leaving only the intermittent coughing from next door and the crow's occasional uneasy, cooing. I remained lying on the cool floor under the veranda, my gaze returning to the little insects scurrying on the ground. After spacing out for about 2 hours, the background coughing still hadn't stopped. I could only get up to take a look. If the man died here, it would probably be blamed on me, a massive, heavy blame that would purely attract hatred. If one is cursed to go to hell, would the heavens turn a blind eye? I pushed open the door and saw not a man sitting composedly, but Kagaya Ubuyashiki slumped weakly over the cold desk. His spine was bent uncontrollably, trembling violently with each heart-wrenching cough. His thin frame looked as if it might fall apart with the next fit. His pale fingers gripped the edge of the table tightly, his knuckles turning white from the effort, yet he couldn't suppress the painful whimpers that seemed to come from the depths of his lungs. He didn't even have the strength to lift his head. His loose hair hung down, obscuring most of his face, leaving only his bloodless skin and the physiological tears forced out by the violent coughing visible. The Kasugai crow was no longer pacing but had pressed its entire body against his trembling cheek, vainly trying to wipe away his cold sweat with its wings. Hearing the sound of me entering, Ubuyashiki's body stiffened. He seemed to want to force a final shred of dignity, but was completely overwhelmed by another surge of coughing, only able to squeeze out broken rasps from deep in his throat. Forgive me. My gaze swept across the room, and with a thought, several slender yet sharp black whips quietly emerged from behind me. Like living weavers, they precisely and quickly cut, bound, and attached, in almost a breath's time, a wooden umbrella, with a simple, ancient design but sufficient width was formed. Holding this, I stepped out into the sun-drenched day and headed to the nearby mountains to find medicinal herbs. Coughing, fever, weakness, although these were all illnesses caused by a curse, they could still be alleviated with herbs. Medical skills in the Sengoku period could handle basic common illnesses and trauma, but limited by scientific understanding in medical conditions, the effectiveness of treating complex or infectious diseases was poor. Knowing nothing of certain internal causes, they mostly attributed them to spirits and demons, or abnormal weather, with treatments focused on exorcism, such as prayer and incense. Many ancients didn't die from the disease itself but were instead treated to death. In my era, a doctor like the old divine physician, who defied science, was probably a once-in-a-millennium find, right? In modern times, he'd be a perverted scientist at the origin of resident evil. Did that demon leave in broad daylight? Kagaya Ubuyashiki leaned over the desk, his violent coughing subsiding slightly, leaving only the instinctive trembling of his body and a burning pain deep in his throat. He clearly heard the wooden thumping, followed by the sound of the other party's footsteps departing without hesitation. However, not much time passed. Perhaps only enough for half a cup of tea, before the light and steady footsteps returned and walked straight toward him. The other party squatted down beside him. Ubuyashiki's body instinctively tensed for a moment, not out of aggressive intent, but as a primal caution when facing an unknown existence. He felt a cool, inhuman aura emanating from the other party. Chew. A cold, flat voice sounded at a very close distance, and a few leaves were stuffed into his mouth. Ubuyashiki was slightly startled, then obediently opened his mouth slightly, taking the bitter leaves into his mouth and slowly chewing them as instructed. The cool juice spread alongside a strong bitterness, and strangely, the itching that had been tearing at his throat was actually suppressed slightly by this coolness. Then the other party stuffed a washed daikon into his hand without a word. The radish was quite large, with a rough and cold skin, and it felt heavy in his hand. Conditions are limited, so eat it raw for now. Your throat will feel better. After I finished speaking, I sat down next to him. The floor was cold, but the warmth emanating from his high fever faintly reached me through his clothes. I liked the feeling of sitting by a stove. That kind of warmth seemed able to dispel the permanent cold of this body, and it was very comfortable. Ubuyashiki didn't speak, his pale fingers fumbling with the large white radish. After a moment of hesitation, he lowered his head and began to eat it in small bites. His movements were slow, carrying a sense of sickly weakness. With his long eyelashes drooping, the way he quietly chewed actually made him look a bit like a cautious rabbit. Perhaps the radish was a bit spicy and stimulating, or perhaps his appetite was simply very small, for after eating only a small portion, he slowly lowered his hand, resting the radish on his knees and breathing slightly. It seemed even this small action had cost him a great deal of energy. Thank you, he said softly. Though his voice was still raspy and weak, it was much better than the heart-wrenching coughing from before. After a moment of silence, he actually took the initiative to speak, his voice gentle as if talking to himself, or perhaps wanting to break the stagnant atmosphere. I am ashamed to say, when I was young and my body could still run around, I once, with my brothers, went to the fields to dig up wild daikon like this. The corners of his mouth seemed to curve very slightly, as if he had remembered some distant, small, amusing event, even though they grew crooked and gnarled, far inferior to this one, at the time. I thought they were quite delicious. When children are young, they all like to run around outside digging for things. I picked up the topic. How old are you? 14. Ubuyashiki turned his head to look at me. Even younger than I thought. I remarked with a sigh. In modern times, this age would just be a junior high student. It's still an age where it wouldn't be strange to cry for one's parents after falling down. Are you the only one making the major decisions and handling matters? Or are your parents and brothers helping you too? Because of illness, my father has already passed away. My mother was in such agony that she followed my father in death. I had two brothers. My eldest brother, being more sensitive, took my second brother to find our father and mother. In just a few sentences, he sketched out a father who died of illness, a mother who followed him in death, and an eldest brother who, unable to bear the burden, chose to end his own life and even took his younger brother with him. In the end, only this sickly, blind, 14-year-old boy was left alone in the world, carrying the heavy shackles named Ubuyashiki, to oppose the demons. Even with such tragedies in every generation, has the demon slayer core still been passed down? My gaze swept over the mottled blisters on his face, and over his posture as he struggled to maintain his composure despite being blind and weak. Organizing scattered swordsmen, maintaining this vast and cruel organization, and facing the deepest darkness and sacrifice generation after generation, the Ubuyashiki lords actually always managed to have one who could struggle to reach adulthood, take over the heavy responsibility, and continue the legacy of their will. The human will. I understand the sentiment, but why? Why? It must be very hard, right? Your family leaving in such a way, a sickly body that can't see tomorrow, and yet you still have to constantly read and study, commanding the lives of those under your leadership, and watching the countless casualty reports that come in. I analyzed it point by point. Right now, Yorichi hasn't even been born yet. These Demon Slayer Corps members do not have breathing styles. They rely purely on their physical bodies and a single blade to fight from night until dawn against demons who have the advantage. When a human's arm is cut off, it won't grow back, I stated the simplest of facts. But as long as a demon eats humans to replenish energy, they can regenerate severed limbs and even become stronger. Every victory is built upon sacrifices several or even dozens of times greater. You know these statistics better than anyone. This is an unwinnable war. Everything you say is correct. Ubuyashiki's voice was still raspy and weak, yet it possessed a strange, rock-solid stability. The sacrifice is great. The pain never stops. And in the future, I see no chance of victory. He took a slight breath, as if every breath required careful measurement. However, a right thing doesn't become wrong just because it is difficult or hopeless. Demons prey on humans. This is an absolutely intolerable evil. He raised his hand, pressing it gently against his chest, which might have been burning with pain, yet it carried an even heavier conviction. As long as there is still one person who has lost a loved one to a demon and cries in fear in the darkness, as long as the blood of Ubuyashiki has not run dry. He paused, his blind eyes seemingly piercing through the walls to look toward the more distant nights where countless swordsmen fought bloody battles. Responding to that sentiment of wanting to protect and uniting those wills that refuse to be consumed, that is the meaning of Ubuyashiki's existence. Victory or defeat, or results. But the struggle itself is the answer. Even if you won't be the final closer of that answer. I pointed out the most realistic and cruel point of this tragic and heroic narrative. He would not live to witness the moment of victory, and likely neither would his successor. All the pain and sacrifice might, through generation after generation, be nothing more than stones cast into a dark abyss, with no echo to be heard. An almost transparent, sorrowful, yet incredibly peaceful smile appeared on Ubuyashiki's face. Yes, he replied softly, without the slightest hesitation. Even if it is not me, or even my next generation, it does not matter. We are perhaps just the stones that pave the road. The road itself is more important than the stones. He turned his head slightly, as if listening to an echo from distant time and space. To be able to become a part of this road, to be able to clear away some obstacles and illuminate a step forward for the person who might appear in future generations to end all this. This, meaning, is enough to sustain every breath and every choice at this moment. There was no self-important fanaticism in his voice, only a deep peace of having accepted his own fate. It was a resolve that completely merged personal life, death, success, and failure into a grander, longer river. I'm sorry. I looked at him and spoke sincerely. My brain could no longer truly comprehend this kind of persistence that was destined to have no reward. It didn't fit any optimal solution for efficiency or survival. However, according to the principles I knew from my past, and my studies of history, this kind of will, this kind of practice, this selfless, steadfast, righteousness, of sacrificing oneself for others was inherently worthy of respect. It was something that should be treated with gravity. Therefore, I apologized for it. Ubuyashiki listened quietly. The complex astonishment on his face slowly faded, replaced by a deeper, knowing calm. He couldn't see any expression that might be on my face, but he seemed to sense something. He leaned slightly toward me, his voice as soft as a sigh, yet it reached my ears clearly. You don't actually understand the true weight of these words, do you? That gentle gaze seemed to look directly into my hollow core. On Ubuyashiki's scarred face was a look of almost divine pity, as if he were sympathizing with a soul trapped behind an invisible wall. No, I understand everything you're saying, I denied. Ubuyashiki simply watched me with an indescribable gaze, one that was extremely gentle yet filled with profound sadness. That gaze seemed to penetrate my skin and see the void at my core. After a long while, he finally spoke very softly, his voice carrying a knowing regret. I didn't mean understand. I meant feel. Ubuyashiki shook his head slightly, as if finally confirming a cruel hypothesis and feeling a great sorrow for me. His hand searched hesitantly through the air, eventually coming to rest gently on the back of my hand, his palm burning with the heat of illness and carrying a faint, imperceptible tremor. Then, with a slow and solemn tenderness, he took my hand. Is it because you became a demon? He asked softly. To have the core of being human, so cruelly stripped away. He paused, as if imagining a world devoid of color, and then, with absolute certainty, he defined the past of my, non-human, existence. In your previous life, you must have been a very gentle person. Was I a gentle person before I transmigrated? Probably, just ordinary. If I encountered a stray animal on the street, had just bought a ham sausage, and was in a good mood, I might break off a piece to feed it. But I wouldn't go out of my way to buy one, nor would I think about taking the animal home. If I saw a donation link online, and the amount was small and the process easy, I might click it occasionally. But I wouldn't follow up on it. If a colleague or classmate needed help moving something that wasn't too heavy, I'd help out. But if it was a troublesome task that took up a lot of time, I'd find an excuse to decline. As for helping an elderly person who had fallen, I wouldn't selflessly do something with such high risk and low reward, where I might even be framed. You are truly strange, was all I could say, as I didn't know how he had reached that conclusion. Ubuyashiki's hand holding mine paused slightly, and a very faint, helpless, bitter smile seemed to flicker across his scarred face. He didn't let go, instead, his feverish palm gripped a bit tighter, as if trying to warm a piece of ice that would never thaw. But it's true that I feel like nothing matters anymore. Many things in my memory that should be happy now seem foolish, and things I once understood, I've started to find incomprehensible. It's probably because I've lived too long, and forgotten many things. I said flatly. Hundreds of years had made me somewhat forgetful of human thoughts. For instance, when seeing a sunset, should I feel warmth or desolation? When hearing cicadas, should I think of summer or parting? These feelings that once came naturally now felt as if they were behind frosted glass. I could see the outlines, but I couldn't feel the temperature. Then go and seek them, in the valleys and in the alleys. Ubuyashiki's voice was as light as morning dew on a petal. Go see how the summer lotuses sway in the rain to cast fragmented light. Go listen to the winter sparrows chirping among the branches until their feathers grow heavy. Go to the alley entrance to smell the fragrance of freshly baked shortbread. Go to the stone steps to watch an old woman with a bamboo basket laughing and chatting with passers-by. You certainly haven't forgotten how to feel. Ubuyashiki reached out a hand and gently tapped the space between my brows, where there was neither warmth nor emotional fluctuation. You've just hidden them too deep, so deep that even you can't find them. His palm was still burning, like a small fire that wouldn't start a conflagration. I suddenly remembered passing the shrine at the foot of the mountain last night, the lanterns under the eaves swaying in the wind, light and shadow flickering warmly on the stone lanterns. At that moment, my heart seemed to stir slightly, very lightly, like a feather brushing the surface of water. You are truly intelligent. Just looking at you, you seem like the child from another family, I praised sincerely. At such a young age, he possessed such broad-mindedness and a far-sighted mind, easily grasping the thoughts of others in casual conversation. So be it, I will go look for them. He chuckled softly and asked when I would depart. There's nothing to prepare, I can go anytime, I replied. Just then, the crow spoke. Sunset. The sky had already darkened. But I didn't leave. The only candle in the room had long since burned out. Leaving a 14-year-old blind child alone in the pitch-black night seemed inappropriate. Is there something else? Ubuyashiki asked softly, sensing that I hadn't left. A small child staying alone is bound to be afraid, especially at night, I said, suddenly remembering myself before I transmigrated. Back then, turning off the lights to sleep always felt like a race against ghosts and monsters. I would take a deep breath, flip the switch, and immediately dash back to bed to wrap myself tightly in the quilt, as if that would trigger the magical law of, ghosts cannot attack you under the covers. If you're afraid, just hold onto my clothes. I'm a reliable adult, after all, and my shoulders are quite broad. Ubuyashiki seemed to freeze for a moment, and then a gentle smile overflowed from his tone, like moonlight scattered by the wind. All right. Following the back of my hand, he felt for the fabric of my sleeve and then, very lightly and with a touch of cautious strength, gripped a small corner. He tilted his body slightly, and his shoulder leaned gently against my arm. The weight was very light, like a fallen cherry blossom petal. Outside the window, the wind rustled the leaves, and the faint chirping of insects came from the distance. In the darkness, I could hear his shallow breathing and feel his hand clutching my sleeve, occasionally rising and falling slightly with his breath. When I was little and heard ghost stories, I always felt like there were shadows flickering outside the window at night. Back then, I would grab my father's arm, gripping it tightly, as if that would make me unafraid. He suddenly brought up the past, his voice steeped in a soft, warm nostalgia. I must have caused father a lot of trouble during that time. His health was already poor, and grabbing his arm surely hindered his work efficiency. Mother would always be by his side, with a helpless yet smiling expression, gently stroking my head. After I fell asleep, my two older brothers would carry me back to my room on their backs, and then the three of us brothers would sleep huddled together. Ubuyashiki did not suggest recruitment, both he and I were well aware of the reason. Even if the current atmosphere is peaceful, even carrying a trace of eerie warmth, even if we shared a dialogue that transcended opposing sides and reached a nearly philosophical level, he would never, nor could he ever, gamble the lives of the entire Demon Slayer Corps on the unpredictable goodwill of a non-human being like me, based on my memories as a human. His wisdom lay exactly there. What he offered was guidance, compassion, and a seed that might sprout in the future, but certainly not an immediate, dangerous invitation. He clearly drew the line. He could be a teacher, guiding one who had lost their way, or a benevolent man, sympathizing with a victim, but he was first and foremost the master of the Demon Slayer Corps. This identity destined him to maintain absolute rationality and responsibility beyond emotion. And I, too, was clear about this. This brief peace between us was built upon a dangerous, precarious balance. But this balance was as fragile as a thin layer of ice. Any substantial request concerning stance or interest, such as, join us, would immediately become a massive boulder crashing onto the ice. So, we tacitly avoided the subject. I left on the night of the second day, near dawn. Safe travels, Ubuyashiki said softly. He was still sitting on the porch, facing the direction of my departure, his face carrying its habitual tranquility. I thought for a moment and snapped off a pinky finger. I worked to control the flesh and bone within it to change its shape. Initially, I wanted to mold it into the shape of a flute, but after a few attempts, I found it too ugly to meet my expectations and gave up. Ultimately, that section of finger bone was forcibly compressed and modified, covered with a smooth, slightly bone-lustered membrane, forming a small, modern-style oval whistle. I organized my words, trying to explain this whim. If there is truly no other way, and you are forced into a desperate situation, blow it. Of course, you can throw it away afterward or keep it, I added, handing the decision-making power entirely back to him. It's all your choice. My habits based on human memory told me that this seemed to be a behavioral pattern known as a parting gift, or a token. Perhaps I was merely imitating, trying to put a period on this strange encounter in accordance with some social convention. Ubuyashiki's fingers closed gently, gripping the peculiar bone whistle. He asked nothing, only nodding slightly. Thank you for your gift, he said softly, carefully putting the whistle away. I didn't speak again, turning to blend into the fading night. I began my journey on foot, following Ubuyashiki's guidance to find that missing feeling, or perception. However, walking upon this ancient land, my initial observations pointed to a discouraging conclusion. In this era, I likely wouldn't find the answer. The mountains and rivers remained magnificent, and cherry blossoms would bloom and fall with the seasons. But the people moving among them were mostly like the living dead, covered in a layer of gray haze. I walked through villages and saw farmers with hunched backs in the fields, their eyes numb, as if there were no difference between them and the oxen they drove. Their only motivation was the instinct for survival and the lash of the nobility. Their joys and sorrows were squeezed by heavy taxes and forced labor until only the most primal exhaustion remained. I passed through towns where the marketplaces were filled with hawking cries. People exchanged goods and copper coins, their eyes flickering with calculation and wariness, arguing until they were red in the face over the gain or loss of a single mon. The freshly steamed delicacies might have had an aroma, but it was mostly masked by the smell of sweat, dust, and a certain obscure air of despair. I stayed in dilapidated Hatago and heard travelers' fears of bandits, laments over illness, and complaints about the injustice of the world. In their idle talk, there was rarely any wonder at beauty, but rather a difficult struggle for life. Kindness. Occasionally, there was some. An old woman might see me alone and hand me a hard, dry rice ball. A child might follow me for a short distance out of curiosity, only to be quickly pulled back by an adult in a panic. A traveling merchant might warn me that the mountain road ahead was difficult. These tiny, scattered bits of kindness were just that and nothing more. They could not trigger that reaction called warmth, or being moved, within my cold core. Most people seemed to operate according to some set program, birth, labor, reproduction, endurance, death. Their emotions also seemed compressed into an extremely narrow frequency, becoming coarse and dull for the sake of survival. The kind of delicate and rich color of life that Ubuyashiki described, which needed to be felt with the heart, seemed like a luxury in this era where people generally rushed for survival and were shrouded in fear and ignorance. I continued walking, collecting data, and performing analysis and comparison. But a question became increasingly clear. Is the thing I am looking for truly missing, or is it like a phantom, existing only in the eyes of a very few people like Ubuyashiki, while in this vast yet barren world, it is actually scarce? The journey on foot was long and tedious. I don't know how much time passed before the sun sank in the west, and I casually stepped into a somewhat lively town. The air faintly drifted with a clean, bitter scent of medicinal herbs, originating from a quiet and tidy courtyard on the edge of town. I knocked on the courtyard gate. A moment later, the door was pulled open. Opening it was a young woman dressed in a plain-colored kimono. Her face bore the paleness and thinness of someone long ill, and her eyes held the specific serenity of a physician, but deeper down was a kind of indifference after knowing one's fate and accepting it peacefully. Seeing me, a stranger, standing in the night, she was slightly stunned. A flicker of instinctive observation as a physician passed through her eyes, thinking I was a passerby seeking medical help or a place to rest. She spoke softly, her tone gentle but unable to hide a trace of fatigue. May I help you? Before she could finish, a figure hurried from the house behind her. It was a man with an honest face, carrying concern and some traces of labor. Tamayo. Didn't I tell you to lie down and rest? Why are you up opening the door again? The husband's tone held a pained reproach. He carefully supported his wife's arm, as if protecting a piece of fragile porcelain. I can handle this sort of thing. Go back and stay with the child, he was just asking for you. Tamayo nodded slightly in obedience, giving her husband a reassuring, apologetic, and weak smile. She then nodded politely to me before being supported by her husband as they slowly turned back toward the house. Her figure was thin but upright, still maintaining the poise of a physician. After settling her, the husband hurried back to the door, his face carrying an apology and a trace of unavoidable worry. I am truly sorry, guest. My wife is unwell. Are you seeking medical help or? He looked me over and checked the time, judging my intent. I missed my schedule and am looking for a place to stay. I gave my usual reason. I see. A look of slight difficulty appeared on the husband's face. He glanced back into the house, his eyes full of concern for his wife and child, but his natural kindness made it impossible for him to harden his heart and refuse a seemingly harmless passerby. Our humble home is simple. If you don't mind, the woodshed to the east is quite clean, you can rest there for the night. It's just, there are many inconveniences in the house, so please bear with us. His attitude was polite and restrained, showing the decency maintained by the head of a household in hardship, as well as the caution of protecting an ill wife and a young son. Thank you, I responded briefly. The husband led me to the small woodshed on the side. It wasn't large, but it was indeed kept clean. He soon excused himself to go back and care for his wife and child. The faint light of early morning filtered through the cracks of the woodshed. I heard a slight, rhythmic grinding sound coming from the direction of the main house, interspersed with suppressed coughing. Through the gap in the woodshed door, I saw Tamayo sitting under the veranda with a mortar and herbs before her. Her movements were slow due to weakness, but every step was extremely focused and earnest. Her husband stood beside her, brows furrowed, his face full of heartache and confusion. Tamayo, why do you trouble yourself so? Her husband's voice was low, carrying an irrepressible pain. You are already like this, why must you waste your energy grinding medicine for others? Tamayo did not immediately stop her movements. She carefully poured the ground powder into a small paper packet before slowly looking up, a faint, extremely weak, yet exceptionally calm smile appearing on her pale face. Husband, her voice was soft, yet it carried an unquestionable firmness. It is precisely because I am already like this that I must do so. She caught her breath slightly and continued softly, as if comforting her husband and convincing herself, my illness. I know it well, it is already incurable. However, alleviating the pain of others and accumulating good deeds, perhaps one day, these tiny seeds of merit might move the gods and Buddhas. There was no fanaticism in her words, only a deep, almost desperate hope, a persistence in clinging to the only thing she could do in a hopeless situation to seek spiritual solace. Even if it ultimately cannot change my fate, her gaze turned tenderly toward the house, where her sleeping child lay. It would be good if I could accumulate some blessings for our child. Hearing this, the husband's eyes instantly reddened. He turned his head away, his shoulders trembling slightly, unable to say another word of dissuasion. He knew this was his wife's way of fighting against an unalterable fate, practicing her final conviction and tenderness as a physician. I'm going to work. I will work hard too. The husband wiped his face vigorously, as if to cast away all sorrow. His voice regained its vigor as he strode out of the house, his back carrying the determination to shoulder everything for his family. For the moment, only Tamayo remained in the courtyard, along with me standing in the shadows of the woodshed. I picked up the oil paper umbrella leaning against the wall and opened it with a shua sound, blocking the increasingly piercing morning light. Then, I pushed open the crude door of the woodshed and stepped out. Hearing the movement, Tamayo looked up. The morning light, blocked by the umbrella, cast a shadow over her pale and weak face. When she saw me, a hint of surprise flashed in her eyes, which then transformed into the instinctive observation of a physician. She noticed my overly pale complexion and the unusual act of holding an umbrella in the morning sun, her brows knitted slightly in professional concern. You're awake. She spoke softly, her voice weak yet gentle. Looking at your attire and complexion, you must be a traveler from afar. Is there any discomfort in your body? She set down the pestle slightly and tried to steady her breath, continuing, I am a doctor. Although my skills are meager, if you have any ailments, perhaps I could examine you. Even though she was trapped in her own plight, her life like a candle in the wind, her first reaction upon seeing a seemingly weak stranger was still to lend a helping hand. This was an instinct almost etched into her bones. Standing in the shadow beneath the umbrella, I watched the dignity and kindness of a physician she strove to maintain, and remained silent for a moment. No need, my voice came from beneath the umbrella, steady and without a ripple of emotion. I am merely weak by nature and sensitive to light. Thank you for the shelter. Just as I was about to turn and leave, my gaze once again swept over her ashen face and sunken eyes. A thought naturally surfaced. Since the identity I had set for myself was a Yushin physician, then according to the behavior pattern such an identity should have, I ought to show the benevolence of a physician just as she did. Your body, I began, looks to be in very poor condition. What is wrong? I am also a physician. On my travels, I have treated all sorts of illnesses, perhaps my experience might be of help to you. Her movements of grinding herbs stopped completely. She looked up at me, a very faint and incredibly bitter smile appearing at the corners of her mouth. It is very poor. She did not hide it, perhaps because she felt there was no need to conceal it from a colleague, or perhaps because she had grown accustomed to this cruel fact. It is a disease that slowly consumes a person from within. I myself am at a loss. There was no complaint in her voice, only a deep sense of helplessness and acceptance. She even tried to describe it using the simplest medical terms, maintaining her final shred of dignity. I've tried many prescriptions and consulted many ancient texts. She shook her head gently, her gaze falling on her powerless hands. But they all seem ineffective. Perhaps this is just my fate. Just as she finished speaking, a loud and urgent cry of a baby suddenly came from inside the house, breaking the heavy atmosphere in the courtyard. Tamayo's attention was seized almost instantly by the crying. The bitter helplessness on her face was immediately replaced by an urgent and tender maternal instinct, even temporarily overshadowing the deathly air brought by her illness. Ah, awake, she murmured, hurriedly putting down the pestle. Without even having time to apologize to me, she supported her weak body and rose in a hurry, walking toward the house with somewhat stumbling steps. I walked silently to the open door and looked inside. I saw Tamayo already holding the swaddled child carefully in her arms. She lowered her head, her cheek gently pressed against the baby's crying face, softly humming a tuneless lullaby in a voice so tender it seemed it could melt. Although her arms were weak, she rocked the baby with extreme steadiness. There, don't cry, don't cry. Mother is here, she coaxed softly. It was as if that heart-wrenching cough had never existed. At this moment, her world held only this tiny life that needed her comfort. Under her gentle and continuous soothing, the infant's cries gradually turned into aggrieved sobs, finally subsiding until only faint whimpers remained. The child fell into a deep sleep once more amidst her gentle humming and rocking, tear droplets still hanging on his small face. Tamayo placed him back onto the tatami mat with extreme care, tucked the corner of the quilt, and then tiptoed out. As if she had exhausted all her strength, She didn't even mind the dust on the threshold, slowly sitting down and leaning against the doorframe. She gazed at the faint bit of sunlight in the courtyard. The expression on her face was one of almost transparent calm, but beneath that calm, a bottomless sorrow spread silently, so thick it could not be dissolved. I walked to her side in silence and sat down on the threshold as well, the shadow of the umbrella canopy shrouding us both. The child is very cute. I spoke up, choosing the most neutral topic that was also most likely to trigger a desire to confide. This sentence was like gently pushing open a door left slightly ajar. Tamayo's gaze remained fixed ahead, but the corners of her mouth curved slightly into a phantom arc. Yes, her voice was as light as a dream talk. He is very well behaved, rarely cries or makes a fuss, it's just that he sleeps lightly at night, waking up at the slightest sound, just like his father. She began to recount intermittently. She spoke of when the child first vaguely uttered the syllable, Ma, and how her husband was so excited he knocked over a water basin. She spoke of how the child would clumsily grab her loose hair and giggle. She spoke of how her husband would work from dawn until dusk to earn more money, always returning with a tired but uncomplaining smile, and would remember to bring her a wildflower he occasionally saw, cheap, yet in full bloom. Her voice was very soft, carrying the warm luster unique to memories, depicting those tiny yet precious fragments of happiness. However, as she spoke, her voice gradually began to choke up. Crystal clear tears rolled down from her eyes without warning, one after another, sliding across her pale, gaunt cheeks and dripping silently onto the weathered threshold, spreading dark stains. She didn't even make a sobbing sound, she just cried quietly, as if this sorrow were already too heavy to be expressed by voice. I watched her, unable to understand this contradiction. Why are you crying? I asked directly, my logic unable to process this negative physiological reaction generated against a backdrop of happy memories. Everything you recounted was a positive event. Is it tears of happiness? In my view, since she had already calmly accepted her fate of not having long to live, and even possessed a sense of detachment as if she had seen through everything, then recalling these beautiful things should logically bring comfort, not sorrow. Upon hearing this, Tamayo slowly turned her head to look at me. Through tear-blurred eyes, she revealed a smile that was uglier than crying, filled with endless bitterness. Tears of happiness. She repeated the word, her voice trembling with an indescribable pain. No, sir. It is precisely because it was too happy, precisely because I once possessed everything so good, so warm. Her tears flowed faster, her voice filled with desperate reluctance, that is why I am even more unable to bear the pain of losing them completely so soon. I haven't seen through everything, she choked out, finally speaking the deepest fear and unwillingness in her heart. I was merely forced to accept the worst outcome. But that does not mean my heart does not hurt, or that I am not afraid. I cannot bear to part with them. I really cannot bear it. It is all my fault for bringing him into this world. Finally unable to maintain her composure, she lowered her head and covered her mouth tightly with her thin fingers, suppressing the immense wail that was almost bursting out of her body, her shoulders trembling violently. I watched Tamayo's violently trembling yet desperately suppressed back, feeling a stagnant confusion in my heart. I understood every word she said and the meaning of these words combined, yet I could not truly touch the core of the emotion that caused her such pain. I do not understand. My voice sounded calm in the shadow beneath the umbrella, even carrying a trace of sincere confusion. Since you have already accepted the outcome, why are you still so reluctant to let go? Tamayo's sobbing paused slightly, as if she had been stumped by my overly blunt question. I continued to ask, my gaze landing on her as if examining an unsolvable puzzle. You say you love this child, and your memories are full of his goodness. Yet why do you regret bringing him into this world? How can love and regret exist simultaneously? Tamayo slowly raised her head, looking at me with tear-filled eyes. She could see not a trace of being moved in my eyes, only pure confusion, which made the sorrow in her eyes deepen. She took a deep breath, her voice hoarse but striving to remain clear. Accepting the outcome, and feeling pain, are two different things. She said softly, as if teaching an ignorant child, just like knowing fire will burn you, but when you are actually burned, it still hurts. Accepting is just no longer deceiving oneself, but the pain, that cannot be deceived. As for the child, her tears slid down silently once more. It is precisely because I love him too much, that I hate myself even more for not being good enough. I gave him life, yet I cannot give him a complete future. I let him come to this world to feel warmth, yet I must take his mother away from him too early. This is too cruel to him. This cruelty is what I brought. She closed her eyes in pain. If he had never been born, perhaps he would never have tasted the bitterness of loss. My love, instead, became the source of his pain. Is that not worth regretting? I watched her, those surging sorrows that I could not truly feel, those seemingly contradictory love and regret, were intertwined in her pale face and broken words. Suddenly, a term that had long been sealed away, existing only in theoretical knowledge, pierced into my mind like a lighthouse breaking through the fog. Guilt. Not simple sorrow, not pure reluctance to part, but something deeper, more self-torturing, a kind of sense of culpability that blames misfortune on oneself and thus endures continuous torment. I understood. I might not be able to feel her pain, but I had understood its form and name. Yes, she was not only grieving, she was atoning for the pain she was about to bring upon the child and her husband. Every tear was a confirmation of her own culpability. This is the thing. The feelings I was searching for, the ones Ubuyashiki asked me to find, the root cause of their absence seemed to be suddenly illuminated in this moment. The most fundamental defining difference between demons and humans is not power or form, but precisely this thing. And I looked down at my own pale hands. I could understand every word Tamayo said, and my habits from before I transmigrated could analyze that the root of her pain was guilt, yet I could not resonate with it. My heart did not ripple in the slightest due to her tears, I did not feel warmth because of her love for the child, nor did I feel oppressed by her heavy self-reproach. I was merely a calm observer, an analyst. I understood all of this, yet I could not feel a single bit of it. I have found it. But I also realized that I perhaps have forever lost the possibility of truly recovering them. That's the end of part 1. Part 2 is coming soon.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and support our channel for more stories. Hello everyone, this is Fanfic Audiobook. Here you find original fan-made audio stories.
Demon System. I became the ultimate demon lord. Part 2. Tamayo was the first human to so vividly display before me this sense of guilt that I could not perceive but was anxious to understand. Moreover, I remember, in the original work, she eventually became a demon and retained most of her gentleness and will. If it were her, perhaps, she could teach me. Lady Tamayo, my voice broke the silence, I have a question. If there were a way for you to perhaps continue to exist, to accompany your child and husband for much longer, but it required you to pay an immense price, would you be willing to accept any price? I deliberately avoided the word live and used the more neutral exist. Tamayo raised her head, a glimmer of incredible light flashing through her tear-filled eyes, the most instinctive thirst for hope. But immediately, that light was swallowed by deeper vigilance and despair. Any price. Her voice trembled as she repeated the words, as if they could burn her lips. Yes, any price, I confirmed, my gaze calmly scrutinizing her reaction. The price is, you may never again be able to stand under the sunlight that humans enjoy. You can only exist in the darkness of night. I paused briefly, observing her expression, before delivering the cruelest part. And, the most serious and likely scenario is, you may lose your prideful reason and your consciousness as a human, regressing into a beast that only knows how to follow instinct and thirst for blood. By then, you might no longer remember your child, your husband, or all the pain and reluctance you feel now. You might even harm them. I laid out the most terrifying consequences nakedly before her. Even so, I finally asked, my tone as flat as if I were inquiring about the weather, are you willing to pay this price in exchange for the time to exist? Tamayo's expression was somewhat dazed. Subconsciously, she snapped her head around, her gaze fixed intently on the child sleeping soundly in the small bed inside. The child's chest rose and fell gently with his breath, his small face peaceful, completely unaware of the conversation outside that was about to decide his mother's fate. Time seemed to freeze. I could clearly see the intense struggle surging wildly in her eyes. The fear of death, the longing to accompany her child as he grew, and the horrific future of becoming a monster that might even harm her loved ones, these thoughts were waging a brutal war. Her gaze greedily traced the child's sleeping face, as if she wanted to carve every contour deep into her soul. Then, that gaze became extremely fearful, as if she had already seen the terrifying sight of herself losing her reason, her fangs stained with blood as she lunged at the child. The immense pain almost suffocated her. Ultimately, all the struggle and all the fear slowly settled before that deep, almost desperate maternal love. She slowly, and with great difficulty, turned her head back to look at me. Her tears had dried, replaced by a heart-wrenching, shattered calm. Her lips moved several times before she produced an extremely hoarse, yet exceptionally clear voice. I am willing. Every word seemed to use up all the strength in her body, carrying a determination that felt like flesh being torn apart. As long as I can see him one more time, accompany him for one more day. Her voice lowered, filled with endless sorrow and self-loathing. Even if I eventually become the kind of monster you described, even if I am the one who eventually destroys the meaning of this existence with my own hands. This sin, I accept it. She chose to embrace a potentially more miserable future, just to trade for that slim, tiny bit more of the present. As you wish. The moment the words fell, from beneath my clothes at my side, a bone whip silently slid out from the fabric, suddenly snapping out like a living venomous snake. Tamayo's pupils contracted sharply at the sight of this inhuman scene. Her body instinctively wanted to retreat, but she was pinned to the spot by her resolute choice. She watched helplessly as that inhuman, terrifying bone whip pierced her slender neck with unavoidable speed and precision. Ah! She let out a short, pained groan, her body trembling violently. The bone whip, formed from my own flesh and blood, began to forcefully inject blood containing the power of a demon into her body. This was the first time I had created one of my own kind, and there was no precedent to follow. An overdose could cause the vessel to collapse from being unable to withstand it, or even cause the body to explode. After only a few seconds, I manipulated the bone whip to retract sharply, bringing out a few drops of dark red blood. The bone whip shrunk back into my body like a living thing, as if nothing had happened. Tamayo slumped powerlessly to the ground, her hands clutching the small wound on her neck tightly. Her body convulsed violently from the sudden intense pain and the sensation of a foreign substance. She gasped for air, her face filled with agony and fear of the unknown. Beneath her pale skin, the veins bulged hideously, the transformation process had already begun. I could perceive that the life force within her was being forcibly twisted, merging and mutating with the blood I had given her. The dosage was not much, but it was enough to start an irreversible process. Whether she could maintain her sanity would be a gamble between her own will and this faint, demon blood. Tamayo slumped powerlessly to the ground, her hands clutching the wound on her neck that continuously sent sensations of burning and tearing. Her body convulsed uncontrollably from the intense pain and the nascent mutation. She gasped for air, every breath feeling like swallowing scorching sand. In the midst of this extreme pain and confusion, she suddenly raised her head. Her face was a mask of agony, distorted by bulging veins and mixed with tears. Using all her remaining strength, she looked at me and squeezed a broken, desperate plea from the depths of her throat. If. She trembled violently, almost unable to speak. If I cannot control it, and harm them. Her gaze locked onto me, as if I were the only straw she could grasp leading to a final redemption, even though this straw itself represented a deeper hell. I beg of you, when that time comes, you must kill me. I looked at the despair and pleading that nearly overflowed from her eyes and nodded calmly. I promise you. Seeing my clear response, the taut string in her eyes finally seemed to snap. Her remaining will was completely swallowed by the surging pain and transformation, her head lolled to the side, and she fell into a deep coma. I picked her up and settled her back onto the hay in the woodshed. The wound on her neck had already quietly healed under the power of the demon, but the blood vessels beneath her skin were still pulsing abnormally, and her body temperature fluctuated violently between hot and cold. At dusk, her husband returned, carrying a body full of exhaustion and worry. He rushed toward the main house almost immediately, and after finding it empty, he anxiously searched his way to the woodshed. When he saw his unconscious wife with an unnaturally flushed face and rapid breathing, his face instantly turned pale. Tamayo! Tamayo! He threw himself to his wife's side, calling out in a panic, then suddenly snapped his head up to look at me, standing silently like a shadow to the side. Sir! What is going on? What's happened to her? My expression didn't change at all as I replied calmly with the explanation I had prepared long ago: a sudden, severe illness. The symptoms came on with extreme intensity. I pointed to the scattered herbs nearby that she had been grinding during the day. I have some knowledge of medicine and have done my best to treat her. Now, we can only wait for her to wake up. A severe illness. The husband's voice was filled with fear and disbelief. Even though I knew this day would come, for it to arrive so soon, how could it suddenly let me watch over her? I have to watch over her. As he spoke, he moved to sit down beside his wife. You must not. My voice was not loud, but it carried an unquestionable coldness. This illness is highly contagious. Before Lady Tamayo lost consciousness, she had a brief moment of clarity and specifically urged me, time and again, that I must not let you or the child near her. The ones she is most worried about are you two. I invoked Tamayo's name, and his reaching hand froze in midair. Looking at his wife's pained state, he wanted to get closer but feared that if it were truly as I said, he would pass the illness to the child. The immense conflict and helplessness nearly crushed him. He gripped his hair in agony, looking at his unconscious wife and then at me, his eyes full of struggle. But. Go take care of the child. I interrupted him, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. This is her wish. It is also for her own good. Ultimately, the husband backed down in the face of my coldness and his wife's instructions. He exited the woodshed in total agony, looking back with every step. He collapsed in the courtyard like a soulless puppet, staring fixedly at the woodshed door as if trying to pierce through the wood with his gaze to confirm his wife's safety. But soon, the loud wailing of the child from inside the house shattered the deathly silence of the courtyard's grief. The husband jumped up as if pricked by a needle and rushed back into the main house in a flurry, clumsily trying to soothe the hungry, crying infant. This night was destined to be one where no one slept. The next morning, the husband appeared at the door of the woodshed with bloodshot eyes and a face full of exhaustion, his clothes stained with milk and his features haggard from a sleepless night. He glanced at his wife, who was still unconscious but seemed to be breathing more steadily. The worry on his face lessened slightly, only to be replaced by even greater anxiety. Sir. He rubbed his hands together, his voice dry and filled with a difficult-to-voice embarrassment. I have to go to work. I can't not go, otherwise, the family will. He didn't finish his sentence, but the meaning was obvious. The economic lifeline of this home rested entirely on his shoulders. He looked at me pleadingly, this stranger of unknown origin who seemed to have temporarily stabilized his wife's condition. Could I trouble you further, to look after Tamayo for one more day? If anything happens, please, you must immediately go to the rice shop at the east end of town to find me. I'll be working right there. I looked at him silently. This man was clearly muddled by the sudden turn of events, only able to think of his unconscious wife and the pressing need for a livelihood. What about the child? I calmly pointed out the most critical issue. You leave early and return late, who will look after the child? He needs to eat, he needs care. The husband was stunned, as if only just realizing this massive problem. He clutched his head and slowly crouched down, letting out a painful, almost whimpering sound, falling completely into a state of helpless chaos. On one side, his wife whose life hung in the balance needed to be isolated. On the other, his hungry infant had no one to care for him. And on yet another, he absolutely could not lose his job. The immense pressure was nearly enough to crush him. I looked at this man driven into a corner. He truly seemed to have a desperate sort of foolishness about him. Most importantly, he believed whatever I said. After a moment of silence, I spoke. Leave the child to me as well. The husband snapped his head up, his eyes filled with disbelief and the gratitude of one who had found life in a dead end. Really? Sir. Thank you so much. Truly, thank you so much. He almost knelt to kowtow. You are truly a great benefactor to our family. It is only temporary, I added, my tone remaining flat. Go to work. The man offered 1,000 thanks and left the house, looking back repeatedly until he reached the rice shop. As soon as the sound of the courtyard gate closing faded, I turned around. Tamayo had already risen and was standing in the dim shadows of the woodshed. Her originally gentle face was now abnormally distorted, veins bulging hideously under her pale skin, and her pupils had shrunk into beast-like vertical slits. Her mouth was unnaturally open, revealing newly grown, sharp, and terrifying fangs, and a low wheezing like a trapped beast came from her throat. Ha, ha. There was no doubt that the primal hunger, like a most violent fire, had instantly consumed all of her human reason. She was now merely a demon driven by the most primitive desires. However, just as her predatory gaze swept across the courtyard and was about to lock onto the fresh, enticing scent of food coming from the main house, her body suddenly stiffened. An irresistible, absolute suppressive force originating from the deepest part of her bloodline, like an invisible shackle, instantly pinned her firmly to the spot. I didn't even need to speak. I simply transmitted a cold thought. Stop. Stay here. Tamayo's body trembled violently, her fangs bared as she let out a hiss of unwilling yet fearful sound, her eyes filled with the intense conflict between instinct and the forced command. But ultimately, the absolute pressure from the superior existence triumphed. Like a beast tethered by an invisible chain, she paced back and forth anxiously in the shadows of the woodshed doorway, saliva dripping from the corners of her mouth, yet she did not dare take a single step out of the woodshed. Excellent. The authority of a superior indeed holds absolute dominance over lower level demons, even if they have lost their reason. It was broad daylight now. If she took even one step out, she would likely be burned to death by the sun. No longer paying attention to the newborn demon restless in the shadows of the woodshed, I walked straight toward the main house. Inside, the child seemed disturbed by the ominous aura outside and began to cry uneasily again. I walked over and, mimicking the memories of Tamayo and other ordinary humans, picked him up somewhat unpracticedly. I rocked him gently with slightly stiff movements, but he continued to cry. I could only enter the kitchen, my gaze sweeping over the simple ingredients. I quickly locked onto some easily digestible rice grains. I lit the fire, washed the rice, added water, and began to simmer it. I carefully blew on the thoroughly cooked rice porridge to cool it down, patiently feeding it to the crying child bit by bit. As he swallowed the food, he gradually stopped crying, his dark, round eyes looking at me, this strange caregiver, with curiosity. I was a bit troubled by Tamayo's situation. Currently, she possessed neither reason nor memory, dominated by the bone-eroding hunger that comes with just having turned into a demon, a state I was all too familiar with. That hunger didn't surge from the stomach but burrowed out from deep within the marrow, gnawing away at every shred of sanity. I had also gone through this stage. Back then, I relied entirely on emptying my mind, repeatedly imagining the stench of human flesh and the nauseating stickiness of blood spraying while biting into a living person. The more I thought about it, the more repulsed I felt, which barely managed to suppress the urge. To be honest, I even felt that my hunger was more intense than Tamayo's. This body's craving for flesh and blood had almost become a curse. Everything except human meat tasted like wax, forcing it down would only result in immediate vomiting. Only the freshest raw meat could barely be kept down, but after eating, I only felt even emptier, as if my internal organs were howling in dissatisfaction. As I was thinking, I suddenly felt a gentle tug on my hair. The child in my arms was clutching a strand of my black hair with his soft little hand, making unconscious cooing sounds. His eyes were crystal clear, reflecting my cold and pale face. I looked at the child, and a thought suddenly occurred to me. Although Tamayo's mind was currently clouded by bestiality, I knew what her deepest obsession was. This child was the precious treasure she was willing to become a demon to protect, the eternal concern she wanted to witness grow even if it meant crossing the boundary between life and death. I carried the infant toward the woodshed. The closer I got, the more I could hear suppressed low growls coming from inside. Tamayo was clearly becoming increasingly restless. The moment I pushed open the door, the scent of the living flesh of the infant in my arms instantly attracted this demon on the brink of madness. She snapped her head up, her mouth full of sharp, exposed fangs, her limbs on the ground like a wild mountain beast. This was the world of shonen manga, a mysterious place where shouting about bonds and such could awaken a dying or irrational companion. Seeing the child and hearing the child's voice, would Tamayo regain her sanity? As if responding to my thoughts, the child suddenly burst into loud wailing. Tamayo's growling stopped abruptly. She stared fixedly at the infant, her nostrils flaring rapidly as if she were struggling to distinguish something. The madness in her gaze gradually faded a little, replaced by a few hints of dazed confusion. She looked at her hands tremblingly, her nails sharp as knives, then turned back to the incessantly crying infant. Large tears suddenly welled up in her eyes. Her body was no longer tense like a beast's. Instead, it began to shake violently, as if she were tearing apart the most stubborn instincts deep within her soul. Kai, LD. She squeezed out two words with extreme difficulty, her voice so hoarse it was almost broken, yet it revealed a glimmer of humanity. She opened her mouth, and what came out was no longer a roar, but a call so shattered it was almost a sob. My child. I tentatively called out her name, Tamayo. She didn't react, only kept muttering the word, child. Tamayo probably still had no memory, it was just her subconscious at work. Although she had calmed down for the moment, her eyes remained devoid of mist. After a while, she curled up in the darkest corner of the woodshed, her arms hugging her knees, shrinking into a small ball as if trying to hide deep within the shadows. She sat there blankly, motionless, with only the occasional blink of her eyes proving she wasn't a statue. Those eyes, which once shone with gentle radiance, were now like dust-covered glass, unable to reflect any colors of the past. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to listen to some distant voice deep within her heart, yet unable to grasp anything. I stood at the door, watching her irritably dragging her fingertips across the ground, leaving behind messy marks. The movement wasn't human, nor was it entirely animalistic, it was more like a soul lost in a thick fog, fruitlessly searching for the way home. The child in my arms gradually stopped crying, opening his large, moist eyes to look curiously at the strange yet familiar figure in the corner. He seemed to sense the connection deep within their bloodline and let out a soft, tentative coo. Tamayo's ears twitched almost imperceptibly. She slowly raised her head, her dazed gaze falling toward the infant once more. This time, her vision didn't turn frantic, instead, it lingered for a long, long time. Then, she extremely slowly raised her hand, looked at her still sharp nails, and slowly lowered it again. She still remembered nothing. But something deeper than memory, was flickering faintly at the bottom of that heart lake buried by bestiality. When Tamayo's husband returned, I was still pondering what illness to use to explain her current condition and what kind of excuse I should fabricate to make him believe me. But her husband was not only honest looking, he was also surprisingly simple minded. Seeing his wife in this state, neither human nor ghost, he actually accepted it quite calmly. Is it a side effect of the treatment? His eyes widened, but there wasn't a hint of suspicion on his face, only pure worry. It's okay. Even so, I will stay by Tamayo's side until the day she fully recovers. This man's face still bore the bloody scratches from when he was scratched by Tamayo while trying to get close just now, yet he smiled like a fool, as if it were just an accidental scratch from a stray cat. In the days that followed, he was like this every day. Before leaving in the morning, he would always go to the woodshed door and softly say good morning to Tamayo inside. At night, he would bring a small stool and sit in the woodshed, rambling to her about the past. He told stories of her shy smile with lowered eyes when they first met, recalled the fun times they had walking side by side on the streets in spring, and spoke of how she always craved sour plums during her pregnancy, and how he had run to every shop in the city just to buy the jar that suited her best. His voice was steady and warm, as if he were just chatting with a sulky wife. I always stood guard outside the door to prevent Tamayo from suddenly being overcome by bestiality and hurting someone. But every time I heard the sound of fabric rubbing or the man's occasional hiss of pain from inside, I knew Tamayo had scratched him again. But that man never took a single step back. Even if new wounds were added to his arms or cheeks, he would lean in again the next second, his voice remaining gentle. He was like an unbreakable soft stone. Knowing he would be scratched, he still repeatedly filled Tamayo's desolate consciousness with the warmth of the past. Day after day, the husband's clumsy but persistent companionship, combined with the child's increasingly clear babbling, actually brought about a miracle one day. When the morning light spilled through the cracks of the woodshed again, Tamayo didn't shrink into the corner as usual. She raised her head, her dazed gaze focusing truly for the first time on that face covered in scars. She tremblingly reached out, her fingertips gently touching the scabbed wounds on her husband's face, and a drop of clear tear finally washed away the bloodshot color in her eyes. Go, O.D. morning. Her hoarse voice was weak but clear. It was no longer a beast-like roar, but human speech filled with pain and memory. The lake of her heart, once submerged by bestiality, finally let in the light of humanity. I observed this family for a long time. Long enough for Tamayo's child to take shaky steps and babble a few indistinct syllables. Yet, I still couldn't feel any of the things I was searching for. Finally, I bid farewell to Tamayo. Upon hearing this, a flicker of surprise crossed her face, but she quickly regained her usual serenity. She asked me for the reason, and I told her the truth. I turned you into a demon because, in that moment, I felt the existence of some answer I longed to find within you. But now it seems I was mistaken. After all this time, I have gained nothing. It is time for me to continue my journey. Tamayo listened quietly. Her gaze was no longer empty as it had been at the start. Instead, it had settled into a kind of clarity that comes after enduring great suffering. She remained silent for a moment before asking softly, then, what exactly is it that you are searching for so persistently? And who is it that sent you to find it? Her tone was gentle, yet it carried a hint of understanding. Because it seems to me that you are not the kind of person who would naturally come up with such a thought on your own. I opened my mouth subconsciously, and a surname almost buried by the passage of time slipped naturally from my lips. It is Ubuyashiki. However, my words came to an abrupt halt. I froze, trying to capture the incredibly important name that followed, but my mind was left with nothing but a dazed blankness. My memory felt like a punctured cicada slew, leaving behind only an empty shell. I forgot the child who gave me direction. What their name was. Tamayo gazed at me, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. That look held not pity, but a profound sadness. Why was she suddenly crying? I tilted my head and stared at her blankly. My mind analyzed the reason for her expression. From Tamayo's perspective, were we friends? Was I her benefactor? So she was crying because of our parting. She saw my confusion and spoke with compassion. You must have been a very gentle person once. Her voice was as light as a sigh, yet it carried a certain piercing weight. I can feel it, even now, beneath your cold exterior, traces of that gentleness remain. She took a step forward, tears falling continuously. That is why I feel sad for you. Not because you forgot the name, but because you have forgotten even how gentle you once were. The sound of the child babbling outside the woodshed drifted in faintly, intertwining with her words into a strange harmony. The person who set you on this journey must have also been moved by your gentleness. Tamayo's fingertips lightly touched her own heart, as if she could perceive something across time and space. And now, even the way you grieve for him has become so empty. At that moment, through Tamayo's moist gaze, I seemed to see a blurred reflection. That reflection was so unfamiliar, yet inexplicably familiar. I reflexively raised my hand. My fingertips touching the dry corner of my eye. There was nothing there. Am I grieving because of Ubuyashiki right now? I asked her, my voice filled with sincere confusion. Tamayo's tears flowed even faster, but she wore a gentle smile. Yes, you are grieving right now. She nodded firmly, as if confirming an important truth. Even if you have forgotten how to shed tears, even if you cannot feel that pain, you are indeed grieving for him. I continued to press for answers, moving the hand that had been touching my eye to the position of my heart. Why are you so certain? How do you feel it? As far as I know, grief should be accompanied by tears and a pain in the chest. Yet I have no tears, and my heart only feels a slight pressure, far from the heartache described by humans. Furthermore, in human understanding, someone whose very name can be forgotten should be an unimportant existence. Since I have already forgotten his name, why would I grieve for him? Tamayo gently wiped the tear tracks from her face. Those hands had once tenderly soothed her own child, and now they seemed able to touch the very threads of the soul. Do you remember the moment you turned me into a demon? At that time, I had also forgotten the faces and names of everyone important to me, leaving only a beast-like hunger. But my soul remembered, which is why I was awakened by my child and husband. She took a step forward, her gaze like a mirror. It is the same for you now. You may have forgotten that name, but you haven't forgotten the mission of your search. Your tears have dried, but you are still asking why. Your heart no longer aches, but you are still feeling this illogical confusion. She reached out and gently covered my hand, which was resting on my heart. This emptiness itself is the deepest form of grief. I looked down at our overlapping hands, trying to understand her words. My heartbeat seemed a bit faster than usual, and my breathing felt different. But that fluctuation was gone in an instant, too fast for me to capture. My heartbeat returned to a steady rhythm, and my breathing became regular. Everything went back to how it was, as if nothing had happened. I looked up and met Tamayo's expectant gaze, only able to tell her the truth. There seemed to be something just now, but now it's gone. Tamayo watched me quietly, her lavender eyes appearing as if veiled by a thin mist. She didn't speak, but just looked at me for a long time, as if trying to salvage a long-sunken soul from within my cold shell. After a long while, she gently closed her eyes, her eyelashes casting delicate shadows on her pale skin. When she opened them again, the mist had cleared, replaced by a resolve that bordered on absolute. After they are gone, her voice was very soft, yet sounded like a solemn vow, I will help you. Tamayo's gaze drifted toward the window, where the laughter of her husband and child playing in the sunlight could be heard. You gave me the time to accompany them to the end, allowed me to see my child grow up. She turned her gaze back, her eyes shining with a gentle and firm light. I must repay this kindness. We'll see about that when the time comes. I did not explicitly accept her goodwill. After a moment of silence, my gaze swept across her face, which was glowing slightly with emotion, and finally moved toward the warm sunlight outside the window. That was a place where demons could not set foot, a place belonging solely to humans. Once she witnessed her husband grow old and her child reach adulthood with her own eyes, once all those she held dear turned to dust and she was left alone to face the eternal night, she would likely follow her family. Tamayo gave me some advice as she saw me off, Although I do not know exactly how you should search, you will never experience what you desire simply by observing like this. Humans are creatures that need to spend time together day and night to form bonds. Perhaps you should try to truly step into the crowd, to experience and to feel, rather than remaining a bystander forever. I will consider it, I finally replied. I followed Tamayo's advice. After wandering for over 60 years, I arrived at a large town. After scouting the circumstances of various households, I found a suitable one. Thus, on a drizzly evening, having transformed my body into that of a child of about 7 or 8, I was, coincidentally, discovered by the preoccupied head of the house. His wife had never been able to conceive due to health reasons. Though this couple was incredibly wealthy, they spent their days in sorrow because they had no heir to enjoy their company. He pulled up his carriage and leaned down to question me, this, lonely and helpless, child. I lowered my head and used a carefully prepared, fragmented, and vague backstory to respond to his pity. He remained silent for a long time, gazing at my damp bangs, a complex light mixing pain and hope flickering in his eyes. Would you be willing to become a child of my family, and from this day forward, bear the name of Kibutsuji? I froze for a moment, feeling a sense of trance upon hearing that surname. Was this world ultimately following a set path? Even without Muzan, there would be other powerful demons prowling the world. Even without searching for it intentionally, this surname would find its way to my door in another manner. This world felt like a meticulously arranged cage, where all living beings played their roles according to a predetermined script, waiting for the so-called protagonist to end this never-ending nightmare. The cold rain dripped down my chin, creating tiny ripples on the surface of the puddles. I stared at those fleeting patterns, suddenly realizing that I was standing within a pathetic cycle. Everyone was a prisoner trapped in reincarnation, including myself. At that moment, I suddenly felt a wave of melancholy. Then, what is my purpose? Why was I made to transmigrate into this world? If my transmigration was also an arrangement of fate, then what gear do I occupy in this machine? I am willing, I heard my own voice ring out calmly, as if coming from a great distance. My thoughts were chaotic for only an instant before being suppressed by a deeper calm. There was no point in pondering these ethereal destinies now. For me, everything, observing, searching, and even agreeing to become a child of the Kibutsuji family at this moment, had only one clear and singular purpose. To go home. The vague answer I sought, that something which might exist within Tamayo or within bonds with others, was ultimately just a fragment to piece together the map back home. And so, I became the son of this household and was renamed Kibutsuji Muzan. They dressed me in silk clothes and hired a tutor to teach me how to read and write. Every morning and evening, I would serve tea and pay my respects to that mother. She would always look at me with eyes full of hope and then pick out the most delicate pastry from a porcelain plate to push toward me. Calling someone mother or father caused no psychological barrier for me. It was a smooth sensation, as if the words were spoken fluently. Then, something unexpected happened. In the year I grew to be 12, my father took me to visit a prominent and noble household nearby. The carriage stopped its jolting. A grand mansion stood before my eyes, its vermilion gates resembling a massive, freshly scabbed scar. The family crest hanging high on the lintel exuded a cold sense of order belonging to the military. My father whispered beside me, "This is the renowned Sugikuni clan, a family that has passed down the way of the warrior for generations." I stared at that overly red door. It didn't look like an entrance for guests, but more like the slowly opening maw of some giant beast, emitting an ominous omen. The Sugikuni clan. A hollow twitch suddenly came from my stomach. It wasn't fear or panic, but a deeper, almost instinctive warning. Like standing at the edge of a cliff, even if one loses all emotion, the body still remembers to step back. My father was still murmuring something about a lineage of swordsmanship and glorious bloodline, but those words became blurred. My entire attention was swallowed by that door. Sugikuni Yorichi. Just thinking of this name brought a phantom taste of rust to my mouth. The man who shredded Kibutsuji Muzan into pieces of meat. I didn't know if he had been born yet. Perhaps he was still an infant being held in his mother's arms. Perhaps he was already a young boy practicing his sword swings in the backyard. Worst of all, perhaps he was already fully grown and within the demon slayer core. Muzan. My father's voice pulled me back to reality. What's wrong? Your face is so pale. I touched my cheek. It felt ice cold. It's nothing. My voice sounded exceptionally calm, with a hint of childish playfulness. I'm just a little nervous. That was a lie. I had long since forgotten how to be nervous. But my emotions at this moment were indeed strangely bizarre. Just thinking about it caused emotions that hadn't wavered in a long time to become intense. Father smiled and patted my shoulder. Relax. Although the Sugikuni clan is a warrior family, they are reasonable people. I lowered my eyes to hide the strange churning within them. However, when I followed my father to sit on the guest mats and looked across, all my thoughts froze in an instant. Two young boys sat behind the tables opposite us. A pair of identical twins. The same flame-like, striking red hair, the same faces as exquisite as if they had been carved, like reflections in a mirror, without a single difference. Had their auras not been completely distinct, almost no one could have told them apart. The boy on the left sat upright, his gaze sharp as a blade, carrying an innate pride and edge. He must be the elder brother, Sugikuni Mikikatsu. And the one on the right. My breath hitched imperceptibly. His posture was more serene, his red eyes like deep pools, clear yet bottomless. Most striking of all were the several deep red, flame-shaped demon slayer marks winding down from his left temple to his cheek. Sugikuni Yorichi. He was actually here. He seemed to sense my gaze and slowly raised his eyes. In an instant, it felt as if an invisible string had suddenly tightened to its limit. Those radiant eyes, like those of a god, were like the purest lava. Beneath the calm lay a heat capable of incinerating all things. They looked at me faintly, without any hostility, even carrying a hint of natural confusion. But at the moment our eyes met, a shudder originating from the deepest part of my soul, spanning across time and reincarnation, suddenly seized me. Every inch of my flesh, every drop of my demon blood, was screaming silently. My body instinctively entered a state of maximum alert, as if I would be completely scorched to ash by the sun contained within those eyes in the next moment. I saw clearly that in the same instant I froze. Sugikuni Yorichi's originally vacant gaze also stagnated imperceptibly for a moment. His burning red eyes widened slightly. Although his face remained expressionless, his entire aura shifted instantly from tranquility to tension. Like a young beast sensing a fatal threat but not knowing where it came from, he subconsciously raised his invisible quills. He clearly didn't understand why this was happening either. But we both knew all too well that in that single glance, a certain hostile instinct engraved into the very essence of our existence had boisterously awakened. Whether it was me or Sugikuni Yorichi, we had both physiologically bristled in response. Inside the hall, the two heads of the houses were chatting cordially. The head of the Kibutsuji clan took a sip of tea and praised the layout of the Sugikuni clan's courtyard for its echoes of military strategy, while the head of the Sugikuni clan humbly returned the compliment, remarking that the Kibutsuji clan's tea ceremony etiquette was exceedingly elegant. However, beyond this harmonious atmosphere, it was a different story entirely. I sat across a low table from Sugikuni Yorichi, and we stared at each other in silence. The air between us was almost stagnant. It was a mutual scrutiny and instinctive repulsion that went far beyond mere childhood curiosity. Our gazes were locked, neither of us yielding an inch, as if engaged in a silent test of wills. This abrupt and jarring standoff finally drew the attention of those in power. The head of the Sugikuni clan was the first to laugh, a hint of surprise in his voice. It seems Yorichi, this child, has taken quite a liking to your son. He looked at the red-haired boy beside him, his eyes brimming with pride. This child is usually indifferent to everyone. This is the first time I've seen him stare at someone so intently. My father heard this and also looked quite surprised. He studied me carefully for a moment before nodding in agreement. Indeed, I have rarely seen Muzan look so focused. He chose his words carefully, clearly. Using focused to describe my state was an understatement. The head of the Sugikuni clan seemed delighted by this and spoke more freely, his tone not without a hint of boasting. Though Yorichi is not one for words, he possesses a godlike gift in the path of martial arts. He is my proudest son. The head of the Kibutsuji clan's eyes flickered, as if he had suddenly hit upon a brilliant idea. He leaned forward, his tone becoming even more warm. Since they get along so well, I wonder if Muzan could stay at your estate for a while. He let a perfectly measured look of worry cross his face. To tell you the truth, Muzan has always been frail and sickly, and his temperament is far too quiet. I often worry about him. If he could stay with the Sugikuni clan and be influenced by your family's valiant spirit and Yorichi-kun's vitality, I'm sure it would be of great benefit to his body and mind. At those words, both Yorichi and I turned our heads to look at them. Ultimately, through the pleasant discussion between the two clan heads, it was decided that I would stay at the Sugikuni clan residence. My father departed in his carriage, satisfied, leaving me standing under the veranda facing the two red-haired sons of the Sugikuni. The head of the Sugikuni clan gently told the two brothers to show me around. The sky was clear for miles. I silently took an oil paper umbrella from my servant and opened it, shielding myself from the sunlight. Sugikuni Mikikatsu, the elder brother, let his gaze linger for a moment on my pale face and my overly steady posture as I held the umbrella, a faint trace of doubt flickering in his eyes. However, his refined upbringing prevented him from asking any rude questions, he simply maintained a proper host's demeanor and led the way. The three of us moved slowly through the mansion's corridors in an incredibly eerie atmosphere. In front was Mikikatsu, who occasionally offered a brief introduction out of courtesy. In the middle was me, silent under my umbrella, and behind was Yorichi, whose every step felt like silent thunder and whose gaze nearly burned through me. My heart must be racing right now. The organ within my chest is pounding with unprecedented force and speed, every beat like a muffled war drum thumping deep against my eardrums. This is not fear, nor is it anger, but a more primal, boiling exhilaration. Blood surges through my veins, and the cells beneath every inch of my skin seem to be screaming and trembling, as if an invisible current has surged through them before they were plunged into a freezing spring. This is a pure, instinctive confrontation from the very depths of existence. I suddenly understood. Is this, the most direct, undeniable resonance from the depths of the soul when natural fated enemies meet? It has nothing to do with grudges or morality. It is simply the mutual declaration of existence itself, the inevitable annihilation and roar when light and darkness collide. Yorichi. Seeing that Muzan had already entered the room while his younger brother remained at the door, refusing to leave, Sugikuni Mikikatsu's expression turned strange. Mikikatsu's brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. He followed his brother's gaze toward the silent door, then turned back to look at Yorichi's face, still devoid of expression, yet clearly in an abnormal state. Yorichi, Mikikatsu's voice held the undeniable weight of an elder brother's questioning, what is it? Is there something wrong with the young master of the Kibutsuji family? It is quite rude to keep staring at someone like that. He couldn't understand it. Why would his brother, who seemed blessed by the gods, show such a look of being on high alert towards someone he had just met, someone who appeared pale and sickly? It was far too abnormal. Yorichi seemed to only just hear his brother's question. He blinked extremely slowly, his long eyelashes casting faint shadows. He finally turned his head slightly to look at Mikikatsu, his burning eyes still holding a lingering sharpness and a trace of rare confusion that even he himself couldn't fathom. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but in the end, he only shook his head, his voice low and flat. Nothing. Mikikatsu was silent for a moment, his gaze shifting between Yorichi's tightly pressed lips and the closed door. A complex, indescribable emotion took root in his heart. It was the powerlessness of being an elder brother left far behind, the resentment of seeing his pride ruthlessly crushed by sheer talent. Why? Why was it like this? This younger brother always lived in a world he couldn't comprehend, possessing talent he could never hope to reach. And now, he was showing such an abnormal reaction toward a seemingly ordinary, sickly youth. All of it seemed to silently mock how futile his efforts and his struggle to catch up truly were. He couldn't see what it was that Yorichi had discovered. If there is nothing, then do not linger here any longer. Sugikuni Mikikatsu's fist tightened beneath his wide sleeve, his knuckles turning white from the strain before he forced himself to relax. He maintained his composure, his voice steady but firm. Staring at a guest's quarters is not the way to treat a guest, it is also improper. His gaze swept over Yorichi's profile, which was still turned toward the door. That focus and sense of alienation were like a fine needle piercing his proud heart. Eventually, he suppressed the bitterness churning within him and turned to leave first, his robes cutting a stiff arc through the air. We are going back, Yorichi. Those words drifted through the cool evening air, sounding more like a command to himself. Yorichi stood still for a moment longer, cast one last deep look at the closed door, and then silently turned to follow his brother. Silence finally returned to the veranda. I leaned against the inside of the door, listening to the two sets of footsteps gradually recede until they vanished completely. The tension that felt like being scorched by a blazing sun slowly drained away, my boiling blood began to cool, and the drumming of my heart returned to a pace that was slightly faster than usual but manageable. Yet, a subtle afterglow of exhilaration still lingered in my senses, like the damp air after a storm, a reminder of that brief but extraordinary surge of emotion. The peace didn't last long before an overlooked question surfaced in my mind. No. I remember, didn't Sugikuni Yorichi leave home when he was 8 years old? I looked down at this body, which I had maintained at the age of 12 for the sake of my disguise, and then recalled the height of the twins, which was nearly the same as mine. An absurd yet logical deduction gradually took shape. Could it be that their current ages happened to match the age of this body? So, Yorichi didn't leave home as a child. Or rather, has the plot of this world already undergone some unknown deviation without my knowledge? If only the heavens would grant talent to those who yearn for it. Why is it that Yorichi, possessing such extraordinary gifts, acts as if they mean nothing and only thinks of playing? Sugikuni Mikikatsu swung the sword in his hand, the wooden blade cutting through the air with a dull whistle. Sweat slid down his temples, soaking the collar of his training uniform. Every movement was standard and sharp, the culmination of day after day of bitter practice, yet it also pulled tight a string named resentment. His gaze involuntarily drifted toward a corner of the courtyard. There, his younger brother who possessed god-like blessings, Sugikuni Yorichi, was crouching on the ground, intently poking a slow-crawling snail with a twig. The golden morning light fell upon his red hair and his profile. His expression was calm and pure, as if the most important thing in the world was observing the trail of this tiny life. What was even more glaring was that Mikikatsu's swordsmanship teacher, usually known for his severity, was currently bending over with a smile that bordered on fawning. Huddled beside Yorichi, his voice was kept extremely low and soft. Young Master Yorichi, look, would you be interested in taking a short break to try this wooden sword? Just one swing would do, so that I might have the honor of admiring your. That posture was worlds apart from the rigid and harsh manner he displayed when instructing Mikikatsu on ordinary days. Mikikatsu's jaw tightened unconsciously, and his sword swing came to a sudden halt. Why? He cried out wordlessly in his heart, a burning bitterness stuck in his throat. Why was it that the slight recognition he had to earn through countless drops of sweat and harsh discipline was something Yorichi could make a teacher lower himself for, almost begging him to, occasionally, reveal? Why was the pinnacle of the way of the sword, which he regarded as his life and pursued so desperately, less attractive than a snail in Yorichi's eyes? To the point where others had to plead with him just to touch a sword. Why did the heavens grant such world-shaking talent to someone who had no desire for it, someone who even seemed indifferent? And why did he, the elder brother who yearned for power day and night, who gave his all to become stronger and shoulder the responsibilities of an heir, always have to watch that back? Why was even touching the hem of his brother's robe so difficult, and why did even his own teacher long for that unreachable light? Hey! He suddenly let out a suppressed low shout, pouring all his confusion, anxiety, and that unspoken sting into his next, even more ferocious slash. The wooden sword tore through the air, letting out a sharp sound that was almost a wail. If only talent could be exchanged. If only the sweat of hard work could truly nurture a flower that surpasses innate gift. If only. He gripped the wooden sword until his knuckles turned white and swung it once more. He didn't know how much time had passed before Mikikatsu, panting heavily, stopped his movements, his chest heaving violently. His gaze was fixed firmly on the ground, not daring to look toward that corner again, for fear of seeing his teacher's even more humble posture, or his brother's eyes that were forever calm and rippleless, reflecting none of his struggles. He gripped the wooden sword, his knuckles white from excessive force, attempting to swing it again to vent all his emotions. However, his arms gave a weak, trembling sensation, his overtaxed physical strength had finally issued a protest. He had no choice but to lower the wooden sword, take a deep breath, and prepare for a brief rest. Just as he looked up, his gaze inadvertently swept across the corridor not far away. A figure sat quietly in the shadows under the veranda. It was the temporary guest, Kibutsuji Muzan. He didn't know how long the guest had been sitting there, or how much he had seen. There was no obvious expression on that pale face, he just quietly watched the direction of the training grounds, those deep red eyes like an ancient well, so profound that no emotion could be discerned. Mikikatsu's heart sank abruptly. An indescribable embarrassment instantly swept over him. That gaze somehow reminded him of the servants' private whispers, the rumors about young Master Yorichi's talent, and how the air might be changed. His wretched state, soaked in sweat, His gasping after overexertion, and that almost uncontrollable practice posture just now, twisted by jealousy and resentment, had all this unseemliness fallen into the eyes of this bystander. Mikey Katsu took a deep breath, forcing himself to suppress his surging emotions. He was, after all, the eldest son of the Sugikuni clan and could never completely lose his composure before an outsider. He quickly wiped the sweat from his temples with his sleeve, straightened his slightly messy collar, and strove to return his expression to its usual steadiness as he walked toward the veranda. Kibutsuji-kun, Mikey Katsu said, trying to keep his voice steady, have you found resting here to your liking? However, as soon as he finished speaking, another set of footsteps followed lightly. Mikey Katsu didn't even need to turn around to know who it was. Sugikuni Yorichi walked silently to his side, his eyes still carrying that lingering confusion as he looked straight at Muzan. Mikey Katsu's mood instantly became incredibly complex. He pursed his lips as a nameless stubbornness welled up, a refusal to be outshone by his brother in front of anyone, especially this equally exceptional heir from another family. He took the lead and sat down on the edge of the veranda next to Muzan, his posture deliberately maintaining the composure of an heir, as if the wretched person practicing in the courtyard just now hadn't been him at all. To his surprise, Yorichi also stepped forward without a word and quietly sat down on Muzan's other side. For a moment, the three youths sat side by side under the veranda, with a silent guest in the middle. The atmosphere became exceptionally subtle and quiet. He couldn't let the atmosphere go cold and make the guest feel poorly treated. This thought flashed through Sugikuni Mikikatsu's mind, and he had just cleared his throat to find a proper topic to open with. When Yorichi beside him was faster. Those red eyes stared unblinkingly at the pale, handsome youth in the middle, and with a flat tone so pure it was almost rude, he asked directly. You, what kind of thing are you? The air froze instantly. Mikikatsu nearly gasped at his brother's earth-shattering, manners-defying offense. He immediately turned to look at Kibutsuji Muzan in the middle, preparing to apologize on his brother's behalf. However, despite being questioned so bluntly, even insultingly, the young master of the Kibutsuji clan did not grow angry. He merely tilted his head slightly, returning Yorichi's gaze with those bottomless eyes, his face still devoid of expression, as if he were merely contemplating an ordinary question. After a moment of silence, he replied in an equally flat tone, one that even carried a hint of subtle seriousness. I am not a thing. As the words fell, the air under the veranda completely froze. Sugikuni Mikikatsu froze in place, for a moment completely unsure how to respond. He looked at his brother, who appeared perfectly composed as if he had truly just confirmed an important matter, then looked at the guest who had solemnly given a bizarre answer, feeling somewhat at a loss. Just as this suffocating silence was about to solidify, a set of hurried yet respectful footsteps approached. A maid ran up to the veranda and bowed to Yorichi. Young Master Yorichi, the madam requests your presence. This sudden summons was like an order of pardon, breaking the bizarre deadlock. Hearing this, Yorichi did not hesitate and stood up immediately. He first gave a slight nod to his elder brother Mikikatsu according to etiquette, his movements smooth and natural, as if that earth-shattering question had never occurred. Then, Yorichi's gaze turned once more to the still-seated Muzan. His eyes lingered on him for an extremely brief moment, as if still wanting to investigate something, but ultimately returned to calm. He then turned and silently followed the maid away. The stagnant air seemed to flow again with Yorichi's departure. Mikikatsu breathed a secret sigh of relief. Although the complex emotions caused by his brother so easily attracting attention and then leaving were still circling in his heart, at least this incredibly awkward situation was temporarily resolved. He gathered his thoughts and turned back to Muzan, attempting to regain the rhythm of a conversation between noble young masters. My younger brother, his words are often unexpected. There was no ill intent, so I hope Kibutsuji-kun will not take offense. It's fine, I said. Sugikuni Yorichi's words weren't really an insult. He asked that question because he must have noticed the subtle differences between this shell and a normal human's. Although I still consider myself human, in those eyes of his that seem to see through to the essence of things, I am probably some strange thing that is hard to define. Turning my gaze to the boy beside me, whose clothes were still slightly disheveled and whose breathing had not yet fully calmed, I took the initiative to speak. Your sword, you swung it very well. You were very diligent. As the words fell, I could clearly see Sugikuni Mikikatsu's body stiffen almost imperceptibly. It was the kind of reaction one has after being praised unexpectedly, a mix of slightly unbelievable emotion and a sliver of instinctive wariness, like a piece of crumpled paper having one of its corners carefully smoothed out by a fingertip. He froze for a moment, and his hand gripping the bakan unconsciously loosened slightly, the knuckles that had turned white from overexertion gradually regaining their color. He turned his head to look at me almost subconsciously, his eyes carrying a hint of undisguised daze and confirmation, as if silently asking, "Are you talking about me?" That moment of being touched was real and soft. However, this brief loosening didn't last long. Almost in the next second, something deeper quickly flowed back, pressing the wrinkles back into that smoothed out corner. He abruptly lowered his head, his gaze sweeping over his sweat-soaked collar and slightly trembling wrists. Those imperfect details, even looking a bit pathetic due to his loss of emotional control, instantly swallowed up that tiny bit of joy. His Adam's apple bobbed with difficulty, and his voice lowered, carrying a hint of imperceptible bitterness as he small-voicedly, almost habitually, retorted. "No. Father said I'm still not strong enough. Just now. I almost couldn't even hold the sword." In that voice, one couldn't hear grievance, only a deep, long internalized self-negation. Mikikatsu had even already prepared the script for what to say next in his heart. He had been through this conversation process far too many times. People who met him for the first time would always, out of politeness or first impressions, praise him with a sentence like, "Young Master Mikikatsu is truly diligent and hardworking, his swordsmanship has already reached a high level." However, this brief recognition often didn't last long. After seeing and understanding Yorichi, the topic would inevitably and naturally turn to that existence he could never reach. But, young Master Yorichi is the true genius blessed by the gods. Young Master Mikikatsu is already so excellent, but to think young Master Yorichi is even more. With an air like young Master Yorichi, the Sugikuni clan's future is promising. Every praise would eventually become a mirror reflecting his mediocrity, every affirmation would eventually fall into being a prelude to that sun-like existence. He was used to it. Used to hearing any positive evaluation of himself and immediately preparing in his heart that inevitable, grander, more sincere exclamation for his younger brother, along with the silent self-deprecation of his own meager efforts that followed. He could almost predict that next, this young master of the Kibutsuji clan would probably be like everyone else. After hearing Mikikatsu's supplementary praise for his brother, he would lead the topic toward Yorichi and lament the gap in talent. He waited in silence, waiting for that familiar blunt knife named comparison to fall once more. I watched him in silence, watching how that tiny bit of radiance on his face quickly dimmed, replaced by a layer of familiar, almost instinctive suppression. He seemed to be waiting for something inevitable that I couldn't immediately understand. Did I say something wrong? This realization gave me a rare sense of unfamiliarity. Dealing with children was indeed a skill I had neglected for a long time. The last time I had tried to have a meaningful conversation with a young existence like this seemed to be, with that Ubuyashiki child. I tried to pull the conversation back to a simpler track that wouldn't trigger mysterious emotional reactions. "How old are you?" I asked, choosing the most basic question. Moreover, I was curious about their actual ages. Almost at the same moment, Mikikatsu also spoke, his voice sounding like a response practiced countless times. "You must not have seen my brother Yorichi's swordsmanship." The words slipped out, as smooth as instinct. It was as if the final destination of any conversation had to be that radiant younger brother. However, halfway through, he suddenly realized that the question I asked seemed completely unrelated to Yorichi. His voice stopped abruptly, and a flash of caught-off-guard embarrassment and daze quickly crossed his face, as if the preset script had been suddenly interrupted and he didn't know how to continue for a moment. "Sorry." He paused, his gaze flickering a bit, before finally answering my question first. "I am 6 years old this year." 6 years old. I subconsciously compared the heights of the three of us. To reasonably blend into a group of human children, this body of mine had referenced a large amount of average heights for 12-year-old boys and was carefully adjusted to about 130 centimeters. Yet the Sugikuni brothers before me were clearly almost the same height as this body. So, these two 6-year-old children have already grown to 130 centimeters. What kind of terrifying growth rate is this? Is the Sugikuni clan's food laced with some secret medicine to force growth? Or is there something wrong with my census data? For a moment, my cognitive system regarding the growth and development of ancient Japanese humans took a small hit. But then, thinking that both of them would be 1.9 meters tall as adults, it was only natural for them to be tall as children. So, is this the point where Yorichi has just revealed his talent and is about to leave home? Destiny hasn't changed. My silence and the slight surprise that might have shown on my face were clearly caught by Mikikatsu. He hesitated for a moment and asked softly with a bit of uncertainty, Kibutsuji-kun. What's wrong? I didn't answer immediately but slowly stood up. Seeing this, Mikikatsu, almost out of ritual instinct, immediately stood up as well. The height difference between us instantly vanished, we were almost eye to eye. I looked at him, then raised my hand to gesture between our nearly level heads, and said in a flat tone stating a fact. I am 12 years old right now. Mikikatsu clearly didn't immediately understand the meaning behind this abrupt declaration of age. He just stared at me blankly, his eyes full of pure confusion, as if asking, so. Seeing that he didn't get it, I pointed directly at the top of his head, then at mine. Mikikatsu followed my finger, his gaze scanning back and forth between the tops of our heads several times. The confusion on his face gradually transformed into a late-coming realization, followed by a hint of imperceptible embarrassment. You're so tall. I thought we were the same age, I said. Mikikatsu opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something but didn't know what. His face flushed slightly, and he awkwardly looked away, his gaze falling on the wooden floor of the veranda as if he could find the right words there. He finally only let out a vague syllable, which counted as admitting this obvious fact. The days staying with the Sugikuni clan took on a strange rhythm. I often sat alone in the cool shadows beneath the eaves of the corridor, like a forgotten decoration. Most of the time, my gaze fell upon that tireless figure in the courtyard. Day after day, Mikikatsu swung his sword from the first light of dawn until the sun dipped below the horizon. The sound of the wooden sword cutting through the air was dull and repetitive, accompanied by his increasingly steady yet stubborn breaths. Sweat soaked through his training clothes countless times, leaving dark stains on the ground. I watched him exhaust his strength time and again, his small, bloody hands tightening their grip on the hilt once more, his face drenched in sweat. Occasionally, he would stop briefly to wipe his sweat with a cloth or take a drink. Sometimes, he would walk to the edge of the corridor and engage in brief, even somewhat clumsy, conversation with me. The topics usually revolved around swordsmanship, studies, or clan affairs, cautious and rigid. He no longer seemed as eager to steer the conversation toward Yorichi as he had been when we first met. But that cautiousness and faint expectation, the hope that I wouldn't suddenly bring up that name, still lingered in the air. My interactions with Sugikuni Yorichi, however, were entirely different. He would often appear suddenly, sitting silently at a distance that was neither too close nor too far. He neither approached nor drew away. Those impassive eyes would look directly at me without hesitation, filled with that same pure, inexplicable focus and scrutiny. We shared no words, only occasional silent gazes that felt as if they crossed the boundaries of species. An invisible tension permeated the air, a quiet flow of mutual repulsion and attraction rooted in the very essence of our existence. That tremor from the deepest part of my soul, nearly tearing apart this disguised shell, was a signal of extreme danger. Yet, from this pure terror, I actually caught a hint of the feeling of being alive. That instinctive reaction, the erratic heartbeat, the blood rushing backward, was strong enough to tear through my long-standing numbness, leaving me uncharacteristically enthralled. But the one who truly gave me a sense of unexpected familiarity was Sugikuni Mikikatsu. His day after day of arduous practice, that system of training built on strict standards, repetitive refinement, and the goal of surpassing others, it felt remarkably like a certain educational model from a distant world in my memories. That anxiety of tying one's life value tightly to meeting standards and comparisons, that suffocating feeling of desperately climbing within a fixed framework, and that childhood that could never truly be relaxed because of other people's children. All of it carried a sense that felt both absurd and familiar to me. It was as if I had traveled through time and space to see a certain spiritual core that transcended civilizations in this completely different world. The sweat he shed, his tight-lipped expression, the obsession with the standard of excellence in his eyes, all of it made me vaguely recall that long blurred competitive society of my past life. Even such a laughable, even pathetic, model of education and growth managed to stir a tiny bit of nostalgia for that distant hometown. That nostalgia wasn't for any specific person or thing, but for a familiar set of operating rules, an oppression that, though exhausting, felt almost kind, because it was knowable. During my days with the Sugikuni clan, I found that I actually quite liked staying here. It was as if I had touched the reality of being alive again, as if I had become a bit more like a human. One day, taking advantage of a gap when Yorichi was called away by their father, Mikikatsu finished a round of practice, wiped his sweat, and hesitantly walked to my usual spot under the corridor. He was silent for a moment, as if gathering courage, but ultimately couldn't suppress the question that had clearly been troubling him for a long time. Kibutsuji-kun, his voice was lower than usual, tinged with hesitation and the unease of being presumptuous. May I ask you something? I looked up at him, gesturing for him to continue. He pursed his lips, his gaze sweeping over the direction where Yorichi usually sat before quickly retracting it. He asked in a low voice, "Why does Yorichi always look at you like that?" He paused, seemingly searching for the right words. "And you seem to have some strange reactions to Yorichi as well." He had clearly noticed the silent, almost tangible, eerie aura between us. It was by no means the ordinary scrutiny or curiosity of children, but something deeper, a mutual attraction and repulsion that was hard to describe in words. "Between you two." Mikikatsu's brow furrowed slightly, revealing a trace of genuine confusion and unease. "It's as if there's some special aura. It makes it difficult to get close." He had voiced that vague yet closest to the truth feeling. "Perhaps we just dislike each other," I said airily. "No," Mikikatsu denied almost immediately. He shook his head with a strange earnestness, as if correcting a common-sense error. "Yorichi, he should be very interested in you." He struggled to find a reference, trying to make me understand the unique way his brother focused, which he had long grown accustomed to. Like how he enjoys lying on the ground watching insects for half a day, or how he stares at a drifting kite. It's, well, a very focused kind of interest. "Mikikatsu," I interrupted him, "you really do like Yorichi." The first thing to cross Mikikatsu's face was an unexpected, genuine smile. That smile made the corners of his eyes crinkle slightly, as if the realization of liking his brother was something that could directly touch the softest part of his heart, bringing an instinctive, pure joy. However, that smile was like a stone cast into a deep pool. It only stirred a weak ripple before being quickly swallowed by something deeper and heavier. Silence enveloped him, and as the joy faded, an indescribable sense of loss was revealed. These two diametrically opposed emotions twisted and intertwined on his face, forming an extremely complex expression. The phantom of the smile was still frozen on his lips, but his eyes were already flooded with pain and struggle, making his entire face look as if he were both smiling and silently weeping. I watched this silent storm on his face, unable to accurately decipher it for a moment. I marveled that a person could carry such contradictory emotions simultaneously and present them so clearly on a single face. This ability was something I wanted to reclaim. Under the impact of this pure complexity of human emotion, an exclamation almost slipped out. "Mikikatsu, you're amazing." Upon hearing my words, the intertwined, unquelled emotional storm on Mikikatsu's small face seemed to freeze. He stared at me blankly, those eyes that always tried to appear mature filled once more with a familiar bewilderment. Clearly, he once again couldn't understand where this sudden praise of mine had come from. During our time together, he had already discovered that my compliments were always delivered in a rippleless, expressionless manner that defied all logic. At first, he thought it was just the hypocritical, polite flattery common among nobles, to be heard and then forgotten. But after a few times, when he couldn't help but ask, "Why do you say that?" in confusion, he would always receive a specific, even somewhat odd, yet logically self-consistent reason from me. However, what truly made Mikikatsu feel at a loss wasn't the reasons themselves. It was the strange physical reaction that immediately followed every time he asked for the reason. He would suddenly feel as if he had caught a fever, his head would become dizzy and he'd have an unreal sense of lightheadedness, as if walking on clouds. The heart in his chest would begin to pound wildly without warning, with a force and speed even more intense and hurried than when he had just finished his most vigorous sword practice. Most noticeably, his cheeks would uncontrollably flush, the heat was scalding and persistent, as if the harshest midday summer sun were pressed against his face, sparing not even the tips of his ears. This strange and intense physiological experience made him feel both panicked and ashamed. He couldn't understand why an explanation that was clearly devoid of emotion, and even sounded somewhat ridiculous, could trigger such a violent loss of bodily control. It was harder for him to handle than his father's questioning or rigorous swordsmanship training. Thus, after experiencing several similar symptoms, Mikikatsu learned his lesson. He no longer asked easily, fearing he would trigger that flustering, strange reaction once again. Mikikatsu merely turned his head slightly, attempting to maintain the crumbling composure of the Sugikuni clan's eldest son with what little calmness he had left, and replied in a low, vague murmur. Thank you. Mikikatsu had indeed felt the heavy burden on his heart lighten somewhat lately. The regular daily training and the brief conversations with Kibutsuji-kun, who spoke strangely but always offered concrete affirmation, allowed his tense nerves to relax a little. He even harbored a rare thought. Perhaps he could go see his father and report on his recent studies. Maybe, he would hear a response different from before. With this faint hope, he walked toward his father's study. However, just as he was about to raise his hand to knock, the conversation coming from within was like a bucket of ice water, drenching him from head to toe and chilling him to the bone. Yorichi's talent is a supreme treasure bestowed upon the Sugikuni clan by the gods. The future of the clan must be led by him. It was his father's voice, calm, certain, and carrying an unquestionable decisiveness. The matter of the heir indeed needs to be settled early to avoid any complications. But Lord Patriarch, young Master Mikikatsu. Mikikatsu is very hardworking, his father interrupted the subordinate, his tone as flat as if he were evaluating an object. But what the Sugikuni clan needs is Oswald, that can lead the family to the pinnacle of glory, not just hard work. Mikikatsu will understand. Outside the door, Mikikatsu felt as if his blood had been frozen by invisible ice, even his breathing came to a halt. Questioning loudly. Breaking down in tears. These would be undignified and would only further confirm his inadequacy and weakness. He did nothing. He just stiffly, step by step, silently retreated, then turned around and left aimlessly like a wandering ghost. His mind was a blank, with only his father's words, but what the Sugikuni clan needs, reverberating repeatedly, sharp and piercing. By the time he regained some of his senses, he realized he had unconsciously walked to the courtyard where his mother lived. Ever since his mother had a dispute with his father, she had moved to this relatively remote and desolate small courtyard to better care for the frail Yorichi. His mother was kneeling before the Buddhist altar, chanting sutras with devotion. The curling incense smoke blurred her soft profile. Mikikatsu. Why have you come? Hearing footsteps, she turned her head, a gentle surprise appearing on her face, but her eyes always seemed to hold more worry for the other child. Without waiting for Mikikatsu's answer, she turned back to the Buddha statue and continued her gentle murmuring, as if naturally telling her child about daily life. I am praying for Yorichi. It is truly wonderful, the Buddha has blessed us, and the child's condition is improving day by day. It is truly heartening. As she spoke, she suddenly remembered something and turned her face again to look at her eldest son standing stiffly at the door, asking in a light tone, by the way, Mikikatsu, how have you been getting along with Yorichi lately? You are the elder brother, you must take good care of Yorichi. That child has really suffered too much. Ordinarily, hearing his mother murmur about daily life so gently would cause Mikikatsu's tense heartstrings to relax involuntarily. This quiet courtyard and his mother's gentle voice were the place he would secretly run to for a bit of warmth and a breather whenever he felt he could no longer endure. But today, something was different. Mikikatsu couldn't say what was wrong. His mother's voice was still gentle, and the content of her words was no different from before. Yet he felt that the warmth that had always allowed him to settle his heart had dimmed, or even, vanished. A vague, indescribable sense of loss seized him. There was no sharp pain, no clear realization, just a simple, childish confusion and distress. Like a hand warmer held in one's arms that had quietly gone cold at some point, leaving only a hollow chill. He didn't know if it was because the blow he had just received outside his father's door was too heavy, making his heart so cold that he could no longer feel the limited warmth his mother mostly poured into his younger brother. He was just a precocious child, subconsciously sensing the change in temperature but unable to understand its complex roots. He only knew that this place, where he could once hide for a while, no longer seemed so reassuring. Mikikatsu still stood stiffly at the door, his small hands unconsciously clutching the hem of his clothes, feeling more lost and helpless than he had on the way there alone. He absent-mindedly listened to his mother's words as usual before taking his leave. I was sitting quietly in the room dazing off when a familiar aura quietly wafted in through the crack in the door. Is it Mikikatsu? I rose silently and walked to the door. Through the crack in the door, I could see the slanting sunlight outside casting a familiar small figure onto the paper door. He was indeed standing there, motionless. I thought that since he hadn't knocked, he must be thinking about something. Waiting for others to organize their thoughts is basic etiquette. It is rude to abruptly interrupt someone's deep contemplation. So, I waited quietly inside the door. After a long while, the still silhouette outside finally made a slight movement. The sunlight magnified his movements, projecting them clearly onto the paper door. I saw the shadow of his hand slowly rise, reaching toward the door, the shadow of his fingertips almost touching the door panel. However, just a moment before he was about to knock, the shadow of the hand jerked back, as if burned by some invisible force. And so it repeated. Raising, hesitating, retreating. Raising again, then wavering and dropping. As if performing a silent and hesitant shadow play, he seemed to be undergoing an extremely difficult internal struggle, to the point where he couldn't even complete such a simple action. I continued to wait patiently, watching that repeatedly hesitating shadow. When he raised his hand for the fourth time, I pulled the door open directly. Mikey Katsu was startled, staring blankly at the suddenly opened door. I didn't speak, but simply reached out to grab his hand suspended in midair and guided it to tap lightly on the door twice. There, I said, now you've knocked on the door. He looked blankly at his hand, then at me. Come in. I stepped aside to make way. The room was as dark as midnight because, due to my demon constitution, I had some aversion to light. All the windows were covered with thick curtains, and the midday sun outside couldn't leak in at all. Only a few small lamps were lit on the table, emitting a faint red and orange glow, making the room feel cool and shady. It was a completely different world from the outside. Mikey Katsu stepped into the room hesitantly, and I closed the door behind him. The heavy curtains completely blocked out the sunlight, plunging the room into near absolute darkness. Only a few small lamps at the corner of the table flickered with eerie red and orange halos, barely outlining the objects but stretching the shadows longer and thicker. Initially, a familiar, suffocating sense of fear seized Mikey Katsu instantly, causing his step to falter. This darkness stirred up some unpleasant memories. He had once secretly fantasized about having his parents by his side at night, a thought considered weak for the son of a samurai. When he was 4, he fell asleep with a lamp lit because he was afraid. When his father discovered this the next day, he didn't receive comfort, but a harsh slap and 3 subsequent days of reflection locked in a tiny, completely lightless confinement room. During those 3 days, even eating was done in the dark, and the entire world was reduced to endless, suffocating darkness and terror. But this thick darkness right now didn't seem so bad. It was like a thick cocoon, wrapping Mikey Katsu tightly and isolating him from all outside gazes and expectations. In the dark, no one could see the expression on his face. He quietly vanished into the shadows, as if temporarily escaping the heavy role of Sugikuni Mikey Katsu. Sorry. I watched him fumble to sit down opposite me and explained, my health was poor when I was young, and I couldn't handle strong light. I spent most of my time in darker places, so I've kept the habit. Mikey Katsu shook his head slightly in the shadows. My vision, which naturally belonged to a creature of the night, allowed me to see his expression clearly. The furrowed brow he had before entering had relaxed, he should be at ease. It is no matter, Mikey Katsu responded softly. He paused, then added as if to emphasize something, this is very good. A brief silence permeated the darkness. Seeing that he didn't initiate conversation, I asked, did you come for something in particular? Mikey Katsu was silent for a moment before answering in a low voice, I was just passing by and decided to stop in. There was a trace of imperceptible hesitation in his voice, it was clearly not the truth. I didn't call him out. Silence fell over the room again, save for the occasional faint crackle of the dim lamps. After a long while, Mikey Katsu's voice rang out again, softer than before and tinged with hesitation. When did you realize I was outside the door? I saw you the moment you arrived, I stated plainly. The sunlight outside is very strong, and your shadow was cast clearly on the paper door. In the darkness, I could clearly see the tips of Mikey Katsu's ears turn red rapidly, and a layer of faint blush crept up his cheeks. He lowered his head slightly, seemingly ashamed that his indecisive state outside the door had been completely witnessed. After another moment of silence, he spoke again, this time with genuine confusion in his voice. Then, why did you do that? I blanked for a second before realizing he was referring to me grabbing his hand to help him knock. Sorry. I originally intended to wait for you to knock, my voice rang out steadily in the dark. But after thinking about it, I felt it was better to do that. I tilted my head slightly. Next time, I will wait patiently for you to knock with your own hand. Sugikuni Mikikatsu did not reply. Are you resting today? I spoke to break the silence, my gaze falling on him. Unlike usual, He looked exceptionally tidy today. His hair was meticulous, and his training clothes were clean and smooth, without a trace of the sweat-soaked, disheveled, and dust-covered appearance he usually had after hard training. It looks like you didn't go to training. Mikey Katsu's body stiffened. He still didn't look up, only burying his face lower as if he could hide all his emotions that way. After a long while, he squeezed a nearly inaudible sound from his throat, responding vaguely. Yes. I went to visit mother. He paused, his voice growing even deeper. Her health is poor, so I wanted to see her more. Mikey Katsu's fingers curled unconsciously, gently picking at the corner of his clothes. That place is quite remote. Mother feels that praying to Buddha shouldn't be disturbed by too many people, so she only asked for 2 servants to attend to her. I imagine, she must be lonely. After all, there is no one there she can talk to. Praying to Buddha, I see. I followed his lead and asked, what is she praying for? In the darkness, Mikey Katsu's breathing seemed to hitch for a second. His voice was muffled, as if coming from a great distance. Praying for my younger brother, Yorichi. A vision of Yorichi's face seemed to flash before Mikey Katsu's eyes, the first time he had shown a brilliant, cloudless smile upon receiving that small flute. But that smile immediately twisted and transformed, his father's stern gaze full of expectation, his mother's gentle profile looking only in one direction, the servant's whispers revealing awe and comparison, countless faces surged through his mind like a tide, frantically alternating and overlapping until they turned into a suffocating torrent. Ha! Ha! He let out discordant gasps, his chest heaving violently, yet he seemed unable to draw in a single breath. The dizziness from hyperventilation swept over him, and his limbs became cold and numb like a corpse, completely refusing to obey him. His facial muscles began to twitch uncontrollably, his mouth pulling into a pained, distorted grimace that was almost a snarl. He looked like he was screaming, yet he was suppressing it with powerful willpower, unable to make a sound. Only those wide eyes were filled with the despair and struggle of someone on the brink of collapse, looking particularly terrifying in the dim light. His entire being seemed to be torn in two, one half falling frantically into a vortex of pain, while the other half still used its last bit of strength to maintain a pathetic sense of decency and restraint. Older brother, let's go fly kites together. Ah. An irrepressible, nauseating sob finally broke through Mikey Katsu's throat. He doubled over abruptly, one hand pressing hard against his abdomen while the other covered his mouth. His stomach felt unsettled, and his mouth uncontrollably secreted a large amount of sour fluid, irritating the base of his tongue and throat. It felt as if something disgusting was blocked in his throat, something he could neither swallow nor spit out, making it difficult to breathe and leaving him only able to make painful retching sounds. Amidst this intense discomfort and total loss of composure, a cold and desperate thought surfaced clearly in Mikey Katsu's mind. Everything is over. His status as heir, his pursuits, the decency and pride he had struggled to maintain all this time, all of it was completely shattered at this moment. He had not only lost his eligibility, but had also exposed his most pathetic, jealous, and ugly side completely. He could almost foresee his father's gaze of ultimate disappointment and the even more brazen whispering of the servants behind his back. I feel that despite having lived for so long, my brain still isn't quite up to the task. Mikey Katsu's emotional shifts are vivid and rapid. Suddenly, he seemed to become heartbroken. It happened right after I mentioned his mother praying before the gods and Buddhas for Yorichi. I should try to make amends as much as possible. I decided to rectify my mistake in the most literal sense. Since praying was the trigger, I would find a place where one could pray. I stood up and, without a word, grabbed Mikey Katsu's cold and still slightly trembling wrist. Let's go. Without further explanation, I led him straight through the dim room, pulled open the door, and burst into the bright afternoon sunlight outside. Mikey Katsu seemed still immersed in his earlier breakdown and physical discomfort. He could only stumble along, his face still bearing undried tear marks and a look of dazed confusion. I remembered clearly that after arriving at this castle, I had caught a glimpse of an abandoned shrine in the mountains over there, desolate, quiet, and devoid of people. I skillfully avoided all paths where we might encounter Sugikuni clan servants or warriors, pulling him through secluded corners of the courtyard and along unguarded alleys, quietly leaving the estate grounds. Following the direction in my memory, I pulled him along at a brisk pace toward the mountains outside the town. The afternoon forest was silent, save for the rustling of wind through leaves and the sound of our slightly hurried footsteps. That abandoned shrine was located just ahead on the mountainside. Mikey Katsu hadn't expected this person to have such good physical stamina. They seemed to have run together for a very long time, long enough for the afternoon sun to begin to slant. Mikikatsu's mind was still a mess. The previous breakdown and nausea had not yet fully subsided. He just subconsciously and blankly stared at the back ahead of him, not broad, yet exceptionally steady, as he followed mechanically. After passing through countless layers of overlapping trees and shifting light and shadow, the view suddenly opened up. An abandoned shrine stood quietly among sparse trees, as if forgotten by time. The red lacquer of the torii gate had long since peeled off, revealing the decaying wood grain beneath. The stone shikigami crouching on both sides of the shrine were even more severely eroded by time. Their features were blurred, making it hard to tell if they were originally foxes, dogs, or some other guardian animals. Only two silent, craggy silhouettes remained, casting long shadows in the setting sun, adding a touch of loneliness and mystery. I stopped my pace and released his wrist. We're here. Why come here? Mikikatsu asked somewhat blankly. You wanted to pray too, didn't you? I replied in a flat tone, as if it were the most natural reason in the world. Having said that, I was the first to step into the shrine's grounds. Mikikatsu followed behind me, but his expression became even stranger. His gaze swept over the dilapidated torii gate, the moss-covered stone steps, and the cobweb-filled hall. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he just pressed them tight. Following his gaze, I also silently looked around. The halls were dilapidated, the rafters rotten, and the air was thick with the smell of dust and damp vegetation. It was indeed so wretched it looked like a den where wild ghosts might leap out at any moment. I paused, a rare feeling of lack of consideration surfacing, but I quickly regained my composure and added, the environment is less than ideal. But I couldn't help it. This is the only shrine I know the location of. Deities should all be the same, right? Our gazes simultaneously fell upon the already collapsed statue in the center of the shrine. Its head was broken off, rolling in a dusty corner, separated from its cobweb-covered body, appearing exceptionally desolate. Mikikatsu stared silently at the broken statue with empty eyes. I, meanwhile, was watching him. I noticed he still seemed unhappy. It's impossible to expect a child to take the initiative to open up. They are used to being direct yet don't quite understand why they feel aggrieved. If you don't ask, he might keep it bottled up forever. Why are you still unhappy? I asked directly, breaking the silence. Hearing my voice, he turned his head to look back at me without saying a word. Is it because he feels his own prayers have no effect? I wondered. Praying shouldn't be quite like making a birthday wish, right? It requires specific rituals or sincerity. But I couldn't exactly go and drag his mother to this remote place to pray for him now. A simpler solution occurred to me. Then how about I pray for you? I suggested, my tone carrying a pragmatic problem-solving attitude. Although I'm not quite sure of the specific process, it's mostly just saying some good things and hoping everything goes well, right? I looked at the headless statue, then at Mikikatsu's complicated expression, and felt this method seemed feasible. Mikikatsu was silent for a moment before finally speaking slowly, his voice still carrying a hint of raspiness and hesitation. If one is to pray, at least offerings and incense are required, right? I picked up 3 dry twigs of similar length from the ground and plucked a small cluster of unknown white wildflowers from the edge of a stone crack, placing them side by side on the dusty altar. There, incense and offerings. Before praying, one must fast and bathe, and abstain from meat. Mikikatsu spoke again. This shrine looks like it hasn't seen anyone in a long time. If someone still remembers it and is willing to offer incense, it should be very happy already, I said. But, Mikikatsu seemed to want to say more. Seeing him try to dissuade me repeatedly, I suddenly realized, this must be what humans often call saying no but meaning yes. On the surface he was refusing, but in reality, he wanted it very much. So I ignored his, but, and knelt down directly in front of the headless, dusty statue. Mimicking the way I remembered people praying, I pressed my palms together and began to pray for him in a flat, emotionless voice. I hope the gods bless Mikikatsu with good health and that all his wishes come true. In the silent, dilapidated shrine, only the monotonous prayer echoed softly. Mikikatsu stood behind me, completely silent. After a moment, a rustling sound came from beside me. I glanced slightly to the side and saw Mikikatsu silently walk up next to me. Imitating my previous actions, he awkwardly knelt down on the dusty ground. He did not press his palms together, nor did he speak. He just slightly tilted his head up, staring blankly at the broken, blurred statue, as if searching for some answer in the mottled stone carving, or perhaps simply letting his mind go blank. In the ruined shrine, time seemed to lose its meaning. After an unknown amount of time, Mikikatsu suddenly squeezed out a single word with extreme difficulty, his voice as dry as rubbing sandpaper. However, having only just begun, his facial muscles suddenly twisted, as if he were enduring some invisible, massive pain. It wasn't an expression of crying, but a deeper, internal sense of suffocation manifesting on his body. His jaw was tight, teeth clenched, and fine cold sweat quickly broke out on his forehead and temples. I didn't make a sound, just waited quietly for his next words. He probably wanted to say something about himself. When Mikikatsu spoke of other things or other people, he was always at ease, showing the poise of the eldest son of a great clan. But when speaking of himself, he would hesitate a lot, as if facing a formidable enemy. Time trickled by. Sunlight moved slowly through the broken window frames until it had shifted a great angle. 2 shichen had passed, and he still maintained that posture of extreme pain and suppression. Cold sweat had long since soaked his collar, but the latter half of that sentence still failed to break free. I hate Yorichi. He finally said it, but the voice was very, very small. It was more of a whisper, almost dissipating into the heavy air of the shrine as soon as it left his mouth, so light it was as if it had never existed. Yet the weight of this sentence seemed to drain all his courage. After saying it, he collapsed onto the ground as if exhausted, his shoulders trembling violently, yet he made no sound of crying, only suppressed, broken gasps. A long time passed before his trembling back finally settled. He still didn't look up, his voice muffled against the cold floor, carrying a numb sense of resignation. Father has already decided. I am no longer the heir. This was only to be expected. He seemed to be trying to convince himself, squeezing out every word with great difficulty. Because Yorichi is so outstanding. In a samurai family, it's only right that the strongest inherits. That is the rule. But, even though I know this, I still can't help but resent him. Only then did I suddenly realize. He wasn't pouring his heart out to that broken statue. He was talking to me. In truth, I didn't quite understand his words. Because in my eyes, Mikikatsu didn't seem to truly hate Yorichi. On the contrary, whenever his younger brother was mentioned, his tense expression would always soften slightly. He could clearly remember trivial details like Yorichi's love for observing insects or staring at kites. He understood Yorichi's unspoken thoughts better than anyone. But the expression on his face right now truly represented hate. Those contorted features and painful spasms clearly pointed toward a negative emotion so intense it could burn oneself. His resentment was so turbulent, yet it was paradoxically interwoven with all his observation and care. 2 diametrically opposed forces were violently tearing at each other within the same body. Though I didn't fully understand, I knew the situation of most children under Chinese-style education. Mikikatsu's reaction had clearly exceeded the emotional scope of an ordinary child. Thinking back carefully now, his suppressed silences were far too strange for a child his age. A normal child his age would have cried loudly when wronged or thrown a tantrum when dissatisfied. Yet, he had prematurely and skillfully mastered an adult-like way of handling pressure, pressing all his surging emotions deep into his heart until his body could no longer bear the weight, manifesting in a morbid and alarming way. This kind of silent endurance is something many adults in society can barely manage. Finally, based on my vague memories of modern education, I reached a conclusion. You don't hate Yorichi, I said to him. You're just sick. Mikikatsu looked up at me blankly, traces of tears and struggle still on his face. The corners of his mouth still instinctively drooped, forming a somewhat aggrieved, kitten-like triangular pout. At this moment, I suddenly noticed that there were indeed differences between his appearance and Yorichi's. His hair color was generally darker, and even the red tips of his hair seemed duller, as if covered by a lingering shadow. Sick. Mikikatsu repeated the word, his voice carrying a hint of naive confusion, as if applying the term to himself for the first time. I read it in a book, I explained, trying to add some credibility to the conclusion. He stared at me, a child's innocence surfacing in his crimson eyes. Should we find a physician to prescribe medicine? Will I get better if I take it? Medicine probably isn't necessary, I shook my head. Because a physician wouldn't be able to find the root of the illness anyway. If there's no cause, then it's not an illness, right? He argued softly. No, my voice was calm but firm. It is an illness. An invisible, intangible illness that was truly gnawing away at his heart. Mikey Katsu blinked at me, seemingly still processing this difficult concept. I watched him quietly, waiting for his next reaction. After a moment, I was the first to look away, gazing at the darkening sky outside the shrine. Let's go back. It's getting late. He nodded, stood up in silence, and brushed the dust off his robes. We left the abandoned shrine one after the other, returning the way we came. Not long after we stepped into the Sugikuni estate, a red figure quickly hurried over. Sugikuni Yorichi stood before Mikikatsu, his clear eyes looking straight at his brother with undisguised dependence, like a puppy wagging its tail. Where did older brother go? Yorichi's voice was as flat as ever, but it held a trace of urgency that wasn't there before. Yorichi looked for you today but couldn't find you. Mikikatsu's facial muscles twitched almost imperceptibly, once again revealing that extremely complex expression, somewhere between happiness and pain. But he didn't lose his composure as he had before. He simply took a deep breath and, with great effort, forced a gentle brotherly smile. I went out for a bit. Hearing this, a glimmer seemed to flash in Yorichi's perpetually calm eyes, and a very faint but genuine smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. Older brother looks happy today. He watched Mikikatsu, his tone filled with expectation. Can you share it with Yorichi? The smile on Mikikatsu's face gradually stiffened. We went to the shrine to pray today, I spoke up for him, taking over the conversation. To pray. Yorichi tilted his head slightly, turning his gaze toward me before looking back at Mikikatsu. I want to pray for older brother too. There was no impurity in his tone, only the most straightforward desire to do something for his brother. This sudden, unreserved kindness was like a beam of light too bright, shining directly into the depths of Mikikatsu's heart, which had just undergone a breakdown and had not yet fully healed. The stiffness on Mikikatsu's face instantly transformed into a more complex, almost helpless expression, which soon became even more contorted. Yorichi, who had a bright future and was destined to inherit and revitalize the Sugikuni clan, actually said he wanted to pray for him, for one of the twins whose fate had long been sealed by their father, who even he knew was destined to be discarded as a symbol of ill omen. This overly pure love seemed so piercing and absurd at this moment. Mikikatsu knew his own end all too well. In a samurai family that valued honor and strength, a twin who could not become a sword, especially the relatively mediocre one, would eventually be quietly sent away to protect the family's reputation and avoid future conflict, or perhaps even meet a colder end. Mikikatsu's mouth twitched as if he were trying to force a grateful smile, but in the end, he only managed a distorted grimace that looked worse than crying. Thank you, Yorichi. I appreciate the thought. The sentiment is enough, nothing else is necessary. Mikikatsu changed the subject almost urgently, as if he couldn't bear this heavy prayer for another second. Muzan and I still have things to do, so we'll be going back now. Yorichi, you should still have lessons to finish, right? Did you listen well in class today? Hearing this, Yorichi tilted his head slightly in thought and said, the lessons were difficult to follow. Older brother is truly amazing, you can handle anything with ease. A few short, dry laughs escaped Mikikatsu's throat. His voice could no longer maintain its composure, becoming somewhat airy. Yorichi, it's only because you started late. If you study seriously for a while, you'll easily surpass me. He could no longer stay. He reached out almost stiffly and grabbed my wrist. We're leaving now. Yorichi, you should hurry to class too. Father and the teacher will both scold you if you're late. Then, in a near panic, he practically dragged me along as he walked away quickly. Another week had passed since the day of the shrine blessing. During a short break after a training session, Mikikatsu gazed at the falling leaves in the courtyard and suddenly spoke in a low voice without warning, his tone carrying a stubborn confirmation. I still feel like it's not an illness. He paused, lowering his voice even further, as if stating an unalterable fact. I hate Yorichi. I looked at his sweat-drenched profile and thought, has he been thinking about this until now? But seeing him so persistent, my initial deduction based on modern knowledge began to waver. If he kept insisting on this, perhaps, was my judgment truly wrong? After all, no one is a mind reader, no one can completely fathom what another person is thinking. Then, I tried to follow his logic and proposed the most direct solution. If you hate Yorichi, why not get rid of him? If you do that, your condition should improve. Mikikatsu suddenly turned his head and glared at me, as if he wanted to get rid of me first. It seemed that plan wouldn't work. I changed direction and proposed another possibility. If you don't want to get rid of him, then does that mean you like him? Mikikatsu remained silent, his fingers unconsciously picking at the cracks in the floorboards as if an answer to all his contradictions were hidden there. He once again fell into that silence of self-torment. He could neither admit to love nor practice hate. If he liked his younger brother, then what he hated must be something else. Then should we burn down the Sugikuni clan? I said. If you don't hate your brother, then you must hate the family. Mikikatsu gasped sharply, his eyes widening. Almost instinctively, he reached out and clamped his hand over my mouth. He looked around nervously, confirming that the courtyard under the veranda was empty and that those terrifying words hadn't been heard by any outsider. Only then did he slowly release his hand, letting out a long, shaken breath, his face still pale. Don't make jokes like that, he whispered, his tone carrying an unprecedented severity and lingering fear. Besides, no one would hate their own family. As he spoke, his gaze flickered for a moment, as if even he couldn't fully convince himself of those words. But soon, a deeper, almost instinctive fear overshadowed that trace of hesitation. Without a family, he murmured, his voice so faint it was almost inaudible, yet carrying a void-like sense of loss, there's nothing left. But you've already been abandoned by your family, haven't you? I looked at Mikikatsu. His family had already discarded him so easily, yet he still treated those cold shackles as if they were precious treasures. Parents are nothing more than a title. For a child who is good-looking, well-behaved, and talented, there is never a shortage of new families willing to adopt. If one has good judgment, finding a more suitable family is not difficult. Even though my rational analysis said so, seeing him look as if his entire foundation had been ripped away, leaving only confusion and fear, I realized those sensible suggestions were meaningless at this moment and might even cause deeper chaos. So, the words at the tip of my tongue took a turn, becoming a repeated conclusion that might offer him a temporary excuse to escape. It's not this, and it's not that. Mikikatsu, you must just be sick. Mikikatsu didn't deny it again. He just lowered his head, his gaze blankly following a few ants crawling busily across the dirt, as if he could find some kind of answer in their meaningless scurrying. I thought he was a bit foolish. When others encounter problems, they blame the heavens, the earth, and everyone else. But he was different. He couldn't blame his gifted younger brother, he couldn't resent his cold and biased family, and he couldn't hate the gossiping servants. In the end, he could only turn every blade inward, deciding it was all his fault, constantly consuming himself from within. After a moment of silence, Mikikatsu suddenly asked in a low, dry voice, how long will this sickness last? I deliberated for a moment and gave an honest yet cruel answer based on long observation. If it's long, it might last until you're in the grave. He once again made that aggrieved expression like a kitten with a triangular mouth. If I'm plagued by illness for a lifetime, I'll die, won't I? He muttered, his voice carrying a child's vague fear of death and resignation. Not necessarily. I countered, but what flashed through my mind was the long and twisted trajectory of his future fate. Sugikuni Mikikatsu didn't exactly die. Instead, he existed in another inhuman form like the living dead, struggling for hundreds of years until the moment he finally dissipated, with no one coming to guide him to the other shore. Even at the end, he never managed to understand what the root of all this suffering was. Over the long years, the version of himself in his memories became increasingly distorted and vilified. The older he got, the more the child in his memories, the one who had worked hard, struggled, loved his brother, and simply longed for recognition, became unrecognizable, until he was completely denied and loathed. He personally labeled his true past self as weak, ridiculous, and jealous, severing ties with it completely. Ultimately, in an endless pursuit and comparison, he lost all meaning of existence. He couldn't defeat Yorichi, and he couldn't let himself go. Mikikatsu. I called out to him. Why do you want to stay in the family and become the heir? Mikikatsu spoke almost without thinking, as if the answer were already etched into his very marrow. That's how it's always been. Father went through it too, standing out among brothers to inherit the family business. The failures are driven away, left with nothing. Then why do you want to be better than Yorichi? I pressed. Mikikatsu's expression grew serious. As the elder brother, I ought to be better than my younger brother. The essence of these two questions was clearly the same, yet Mikikatsu gave two different answers. He didn't notice the contradiction in his own words at all. In that case, Mikikatsu, you definitely don't have any friends. I said. Sugikuni Mikikatsu froze for a moment, clearly unable to keep up with why my thoughts had suddenly jumped to an irrelevant topic like friends. He frowned slightly, seemingly finding the question abrupt, perhaps even rude. Friends. He repeated the word, his tone carrying the aloofness and confusion of traditional samurai family values. Between samurai, there are only superior subordinate and alliance relationships. We must strictly observe hierarchy and prioritize the interests of the clan. Such things would disrupt order. Mikikatsu looked at me, but suddenly stopped mid-sentence as if realizing something. His eyes flickered slightly, and then he unnaturally averted his gaze. I, meanwhile, was thinking that Mikikatsu had a point. Even between blood brothers, it's hard to keep accounts clear, and tangled interests are difficult to untangle. Some people become difficult to deal with once you get to know them well, yet it's hard to speak plainly because of the so-called relationship. This kind of trouble certainly exists. There really is no need for friends. I nodded, affirming his viewpoint. As soon as the words left my mouth, I felt something was off with Mikikatsu. His cheeks puffed out slightly, and his features scrunched up a bit, as if he had accidentally bitten into a sour fruit. He seemed to be angry because I agreed with him. Actually, I've never quite understood why so many transmigrators in fan fiction can easily strike up a conversation with Sugikuni Yorichi and form a bond, as if they've perfectly enlightened him. It feels like something that simply doesn't happen. At least, I don't feel like Yorichi is capable of normal communication right now. This guy probably only has Mikikatsu and patient, gentle people willing to talk to him. Especially regarding the young Yorichi of his childhood, describing him as a flower on a high peak isn't quite accurate. He's more like an autistic child, tightly wrapped in thick barriers, where even the most basic interpersonal interactions carry an innate sense of detachment. The root of all this most likely traces back to his father. When he heard his father call him an ominous child, he chose to completely shut himself off. He didn't take the initiative to speak and rarely stepped out of his room, only quietly shrinking into his own small courtyard, as if this could reduce his presence, and avoid becoming the person who brings calamity, in others' words. Having never had normal social interactions, he naturally doesn't know how to proactively express emotions and finds it difficult to capture and understand complex interpersonal signals. Over time, he became the divine, an indifferent figure in the eyes of outsiders. Mikikatsu and I passed by the room where Yorichi was having lessons and saw through the window that the etiquette teacher beside him was turning blue with anxiety, his lips nearly worn out from talking, his tone full of distress as if he might cough up blood from anger the next second, yet little Yorichi remained as indifferent as ever, his eyes clear but unfocused, as if he hadn't heard a word or simply didn't care about anything. I turned to look at Mikikatsu beside me. He was staring intently at his younger brother in the room, his expression complex and hard to read, but the surging worry in his eyes couldn't be hidden. That was his subconscious, true reaction, the most instinctive concern of an older brother for this different, younger brother. Sugikuni Yorichi keenly sensed our gaze and looked toward the window. Although his expression didn't change, there was a visual sense of little flowers appearing around him. He subconsciously wanted to stand up but was held back by the teacher beside him, so he could only lightly meet Mikikatsu's eyes through the window as a greeting. Mikikatsu pursed his lips, his eyes flickered, but in the end, he didn't respond, only pulling me along as he turned to leave. We walked in silence and unknowingly arrived at the dojo he often visited. In the past, his sword-swinging figure could always be seen here, but lately, he hasn't been in such a hurry to train, as if he's finally resigned himself to his fate and accepted the path he's meant to take. We sat under the long corridor of the dojo, staring blankly at the stone lanterns in the courtyard. The wind swirled cherry blossom petals falling by the corridor, drifting slowly. After a long silence, Mikikatsu suddenly spoke, his voice as light as if scattered by the wind. I will probably be sent away by father when I'm 10. I tilted my head to look at him and suddenly felt that these twins were truly extraordinary. Little Yorichi looks autistic and taciturn, but he has a hidden streak of independence in his bones. Once he decides something, he won't easily waver, just like how he looked toward us just now despite the teacher's obstruction. Mikikatsu, on the other hand, looks outgoing and excellent, yet he always carries a sense of involuntary passivity when facing the arrangements of fate. Even though they came from the same womb as twins, they seem to have been placed on completely opposite tracks by fate. You won't be sent away, I said to him. Mikikatsu turned his head to look at me, the corners of his eyes slightly red, like a small beast that had been poked in a sore spot but was forcing itself to be stubborn. He clearly thought I was pitying him, his mouth curling downward into a huff. But he didn't immediately flare up and retort like before, he just gave a muffled, HMPH, his voice carrying a hint of subtle grievance. I didn't continue that topic and instead asked him, Mikikatsu, what kind of person do you think Yorichi is? He was silent for a long while, his gaze drifting toward the cherry blossom petals blown by the wind in the courtyard, as if reminiscing about something. Only after a long time did he speak sullenly, his voice as low as a stone buried in the earth. A person as radiant as the sun in the sky. When he said this, his tone was indescribably complex. It sounded like envy, a bit of resentment, and a trace of pride that even he hadn't noticed. He seems very independent, I followed up on his words. Mikikatsu's eyes dimmed, his lips moved, but he didn't speak immediately. After a while, he looked up at me, his eyes filled with self-deprecation. Even if Yorichi spoke up, father wouldn't agree. If he really begged father to let me stay, I would only find it disgusting. I looked at his tense profile and asked, then do you think Yorichi wants to be the heir? Mikikatsu froze suddenly, as if he had never considered the question. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his brow furrowed tightly. He naturally understood his younger brother. But that conjecture was simply absurd. So absurd that his whole body tensed up. He suddenly clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white, even his breathing became rapid, and his Adam's apple bobbed as if he were suppressing something. What was even harder for him to bear was that he didn't even dare to think deeper. What if Yorichi didn't care about the position of heir at all? What if Yorichi was willing to leave voluntarily, giving up the position of head of the family, to him like throwing away something insignificant? In his view, this giving wasn't brotherly affection but blatant charity, which would make him feel more heart-clogging and stripped of dignity than if Yorichi had cried and begged their father to let him stay. At the thought of the word, charity, Mikikatsu felt his stomach churn, and anger surged up like a tide, making his eyes burn. Impossible. Mikikatsu growled, how could he not want it? He's clearly better than me at everything, clearly better at swinging a sword once than I am after practicing 100 times, how could he not want to be the heir? It's what he deserves. He turned his head, the corners of his eyes still red, yet he stubbornly refused to let his emotions show more clearly. If he really doesn't care, then what have all my years of effort been for? I practiced swordsmanship and learned etiquette desperately, wanting father to look at me more, wanting to be worthy of the status of eldest son of the Sugikuni clan. Has it all become a joke? The pursuit of excellence is an innate human tendency. Mikikatsu, your significance and the value of your life have never been defined by the status of heir, or by comparison with Yorichi, I said. Not as someone's brother, not as someone's heir, but simply as your own vibrant self, the one who gives his all to practice the sword and become excellent, and who quietly worries about his younger brother. Mikikatsu had probably long since blurred the concepts of his true self and theaself required by the outside world. He was far too young and was firmly trapped in the rules of a samurai family of the Sengoku period. From the day he was born, the labels of eldest son and heir were like heavy shackles, binding him tight. He never had the chance to think about, who am I? Or, what kind of person do I want to be? Only knowing to follow his father's requirements and to strive with all his might to surpass his gifted younger brother, as if only then would he be considered qualified. But he forgot that the things hidden under the label of qualified eldest son, or his true self, the persistence of gritting his teeth through sword practice, the confidence of wanting to be excellent from the bottom of his heart, and the softness of being unwilling to say harsh words to his brother even when he feels aggrieved. These aren't granted by his status as heir, they are the vibrant values he possesses as Mikikatsu himself. After I said all this, Mikikatsu just stared at me blankly, his brow furrowed like crumpled paper, his eyes full of bewilderment. It was the pure confusion unique to a child hearing words beyond their cognition. It's okay if you don't understand, because I don't understand value right now either, I said, my tone flat. Those thoughts about theaself emerged clearly in my mind, but there wasn't the slightest ripple in my heart. I only felt these struggles were truly redundant. To fret over abstract concepts like life value and life meaning is no different from an ant circling a leaf, it's utterly boring. Speaking of which, this duplicitous behavior of mine is probably called hypocrisy. I thought to myself as I squinted at the sun in the sky. I really am not a gentle person. That's the end of part 2. Part 3 is coming soon.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and support our channel for more stories.